Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. Okay, so this is probably going to sound totally insane, but I swear on everything I love, every word of this is true. It happened to me, and it's still messing with my head, you know. I grew up in eastern Kentucky, way out in the sticks. Hollers and hills, woods all around, basically wilderness was my backyard. My granddad taught me everything about the woods, hunting, tracking, just being comfortable out there. And I spent a lot of time alone in those woods, especially as I got older. Ginseng hunting was my thing, made decent pocket money, and I just loved being out there, you know. It's peaceful usually, but peaceful doesn't always mean safe. I know those woods like the back of my hand. Daniel Boone National Forest is practically in my backyard, and I've wandered around the edges of that thing my whole life. Never scared, not really. I mean, sure, there are bears, black bears mostly. I've seen them a bunch of times. They always run off, though. Skittish things, more scared of you than you are of them. That's what everyone always says. And that's been my experience, too. You make some noise, they take off. Never even had a close call. Nothing like that. Just bears doing bear stuff and me doing my thing, trying to find some good ginseng. This day was different. It started out normal. Woke up early, packed my bag, water, snacks, my digging tool, and you know, just the usual stuff. Got my machete too, just because it's always good to have, you know, for thick brush or whatever. Figured I'd hit a spot I hadn't been to in a while, near the edge of the national forest, but still on public land where it's legal to dig seng. It's a good area, usually quiet, and I was hoping for a decent haul. The walk-in was fine. The sun was just coming up. Birds were chirping, squirrels were scrambling around, normal forest noises. Felt good to be out there. The air was cool and crisp, that fall kind of air that makes you feel alive. I was whistling to myself, just enjoying the morning. Dug up a few small patches of seng on the way. Not much, but enough to keep me interested. Then, as I got deeper into the woods, maybe an hour or so in, things started feeling off. It was subtle at first, like I noticed the birds had stopped singing, just gone quiet. That's not normal, not in those woods, not at that time of day. Usually, it's a constant chatter, birdsong everywhere. But suddenly, nothing, just silence. I stopped whistling, just listened for a second. Dead quiet, except for the rustling of leaves under my boots and my own breathing. I couldn't hear a damn thing. It was weird, like someone had flipped a switch and turned off all the sound. I told myself it was probably just a hawk flying overhead or something, scared the birds off temporarily. You know, trying to find a logical explanation. But even as I thought that, I felt this little prickle of unease at the back of my neck. That feeling you get when you know something isn't right, even if you can't put your finger on it. I kept walking, moving deeper into the woods, looking for ginseng, but honestly, my mind wasn't really on it anymore. I was more focused on the silence. It was still there, heavy and thick. The usual rustling of squirrels, the snap of twigs, the buzzing of insects, all gone. Just this oppressive quiet. And then I started feeling like I was being watched. You know that feeling? Like eyes on you, even though you can't see anyone. It's a gut thing. A primal instinct. I stopped again, scanned the trees around me. Nothing. Just trees, bushes, ferns, the usual undergrowth. Sunlight dappled through the leaves, making shadows dance on the ground. Looked perfectly normal on the surface. But the feeling of being watched just kept getting stronger. It wasn't like the normal feeling you get in the woods, the awareness that there are animals around. This was different. It felt intentional. Like something was actually studying me, focusing on me. My heart started beating a little faster. Not panicked, not yet, but definitely on edge. I gripped the handle of my machete a little tighter, just instinctively. It was probably nothing, I told myself. Just my imagination running wild because of the quiet, but I couldn't shake the feeling. It was like a cold finger running down my spine. I decided to turn around, head back towards where I came from. Just felt uncomfortable, like I should get out of there. I hadn't found much ginseng anyway. No point in pushing it, whatever it was. I started walking back the way I'd come, trying to retrace my steps. Looking around constantly now, scanning the trees, the shadows, everything. The silence was still there, maybe even heavier now. It was starting to really get to me. I wanted to hear a bird, a squirrel, anything, just to break the tension. But nothing. And then I saw it. It was just a flicker at first, a movement in the shadows at the edge of my vision. Something dark, maybe a shadow moving on its own. I stopped dead in my tracks, my breath catching in my throat. I slowly turned my head, my eyes straining to penetrate the gloom beneath the trees, and then I saw it again, clearer this time. Behind a thick oak tree, maybe 20 yards away, there was something watching me. It was partially hidden by the tree trunk, but I could see enough. It was tall, taller than a man, way taller, maybe 7, 8 feet, hard to tell exactly because of the shadows and the tree blocking part of it. Covered in dark fur, shaggy and thick. It blended in with the trees and shadows at first, but once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. And then I saw its face. Or, not really a face like a human face. More ape-like, but bigger, way bigger and different. The forehead was sloped back, and it had this heavy brow ridge, and the eyes, Jesus Christ, those eyes. They were dark, deep-set, and they were locked on me, staring right into me, intense, curious maybe, but also something else, something wild, something primal. It was a Sasquatch. I know that now. I didn't know what it was in that exact second. My mind was scrambling, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. Bear, too tall, too upright. Man in a suit? No way. This wasn't a costume. This was real. Whatever it was real. And the silence made it even worse. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen. My heart was hammering in my chest now. Fear. Real fear gripping me. My mouth went dry and my hands started to sweat, even though the air was cool. I was frozen for a second, just staring back at it, at those eyes. Then, instinct took over. Survival instinct. I knew I had to get out of there. Slowly, very slowly, I started to back away. Keeping my eyes locked on the creature behind the tree, my hand was still gripping my machete, almost white-knuckled. Not that I thought a machete would do much against something that size, but it was something to hold on to, something to make me feel a little less helpless. "I'm just gonna go now," I said, my voice coming out raspy, barely a whisper. "I'm leaving. Just gonna go." I don't know why I said that. Like it was going to understand me. Maybe it was just for myself, to break the silence, to try and sound like I was in control, even though I was terrified inside. The creature didn't move. It just kept watching me, those dark eyes boring into me. I backed away another step, then another, moving slowly, deliberately, trying not to make any sudden moves that might spook it. I kept backing away, step by step, until I was maybe 50 feet away from where I'd first seen it. I was still facing it, still watching those eyes. It still hadn't moved. It was just there, solid, silent, watching me. Then slowly, deliberately, it stepped out from behind the tree. Not fully, not out into the open, just stepped to the side so I could see more of it. It was even bigger than I thought. Its shoulders were massive, hunched and powerful looking. The fur was matted and thick, almost black in the shadows, maybe dark brown in better light. It smelled musky, like wet earth and something else, something wilder, something I couldn't place. It was closer now, maybe 15 yards away. Still just watching me, still silent. It hadn't made a sound this whole time. Not a grunt, not a sniffle, nothing. Just silence. And those eyes. My legs were starting to tremble. I knew I couldn't back away forever. I was getting close to the edge of the clearing, but the woods around it was still thick, and I didn't know if I could outrun it if it decided to come after me. I took another step back, then another, and then it happened. It tilted its head. Just slightly, just a small movement, but I saw it, like it was curious, or maybe assessing me. I don't know. But that little head tilt, for some reason, that was the thing that broke me. Something snapped in my head. All the fear, all the tension just exploded. I didn't think, I didn't plan, I just reacted. I turned and ran. I ran like I'd never run before. I ran blind, crashing through the undergrowth, branches whipping at my face, tripping over roots, scrambling through bushes. I didn't look back, I didn't dare look back. I just ran. I ran until my lungs were burning, my legs were aching, my chest was heaving. I ran until I thought I couldn't run another step. And then I ran some more. Finally, I collapsed, gasping for breath, leaning against a tree, my heart pounding like a drum solo. I was far away from where I'd seen it, I hoped. Way further than 20 yards, probably miles it felt like. I stayed there for a long time, just catching my breath, trying to calm down, listening for any sound of anything. The forest noises had started to come back. Birds were chirping again, squirrels were chattering, normal sounds. The silence was gone. Slowly, cautiously, I started to walk again, heading back towards the way I came, back towards the edge of the woods, back towards civilization. Each rustle of leaves, each snap of a twig made me jump. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see those eyes behind me, those dark eyes watching me. I made it out of the woods eventually. Stumbled out onto the logging road, blinking in the sudden sunlight. The world seemed normal. Cars driving by, houses in the distance, the sounds of everyday life. It was like stepping back into reality after being in a nightmare. I walked back to my truck, my legs feeling like jelly. Got in, slammed the door, locked it, started the engine and just sat there for a minute, catching my breath, trying to convince myself that it had all been real. That I hadn't just imagined it. I drove home in a daze, didn't say anything to anyone about it. Who would believe me? Yeah, I saw a Bigfoot. People would laugh, or worse, think I was crazy. But I know what I saw. I saw it. I saw those eyes. And I'll never forget that feeling, that primal fear, that feeling of being watched, being studied by something unknown. I haven't been back in those woods since. Not to that spot, not to anywhere near it. I still go seng hunting, but I stick closer to home now, to areas I know are safer. If anywhere in the woods is really safe after something like that. I keep thinking about those eyes, though, those dark, deep, intense eyes. And the silence, the way everything went quiet just before I saw it. It's like the forest itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. And then, it did. I still can't explain it. I don't know what it was, what it wanted, what it was thinking. All I know is it was real, and it was the scariest thing that's ever happened to me. And sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I still get that feeling, that cold prickle on the back of my neck, like those eyes are still out there, somewhere in the dark, watching, waiting. And that silence. Jesus, that silence still gets to me. Story 2. Arizona's different, man. Flat desert, all browns and tans, stretching forever. After what happened back in Kentucky, I needed different. Needed wide open where you can see what's coming. Figured the desert would be safer somehow. Stupid, I know, looking back. Nature's got its own way of messing with you wherever you go. But that call of the wild, that itch to just get lost in the green, it's always there, gnawing at you. Doesn't matter how scared you were before. So there I was, New Mexico this time, Alamogordo, near these mountains, not as thick and closed in as the forests back east, more scrubby and dry, but wild all the same. And yeah, I'd learned my lesson after Kentucky. Wouldn't go anywhere in the woods anymore without packing heat. Felt stupidly paranoid at first, like walking around town in a spacesuit, but after a while, it was just part of getting ready. Key in the ignition, phone in pocket, gun on hip, just the way it was now. This day, I remember it was a Tuesday, middle of October. Air was crisp, starting to get that bite of fall. Drove out past the edge of town, parked up by this power line cut they'd made through the hills. Supposed to be some decent trails out that way, quieter than the main spots. Figured I'd just do a quick loop, get some fresh air, maybe see some deer if I was lucky. Started hiking along that cleared strip under the power lines. Kind of ugly, raw earth and stumps where the trees had been, but you could see for miles, which after Kentucky was something I appreciated. The cut went on for maybe half a mile, then opened up into older woods again. Still dry, pinon and juniper mostly, with patches of taller pines higher up the slopes. Sun was high enough now, throwing long shadows even through the sparse trees. Felt good, felt normal. And then that feeling hit me. You know, that one that makes every hair on your body stand up like little needles. That ice water feeling in your veins that starts in your gut and just climbs right up your spine. It was familiar, sickeningly so. It wasn't a sound, not really. More like a shift. Like the air itself changed pressure just for a second, like something huge and unseen had just stepped into the room with you, even though you're in the middle of nowhere. My neck prickled. I stopped walking, heart doing that annoying thump-thump thing that makes your breath catch. Just stood there, still, trying to listen, trying to see. Everything looked normal. Sun through the trees, shadows moving, leaves rustling a little in the breeze, nothing out of place. But that feeling, it was digging in deep now. Real dread, the kind that clogs your throat and makes you want to run, even if you don't know what from. Instinct, that's what it was. Just pure animal instinct screaming at me that something was wrong, really wrong. I started scanning the woods to my left, uphill. That was the denser part, the edge of the older trees, darker shadows. My eyes strained, trying to pierce through the patterns of light and shade, and that's when I saw it. Movement, just a flicker at first, deep in the shadows at the edge of the trees, maybe 50 yards off. Something that didn't quite fit with the swaying branches and the dancing light. I froze, every muscle locked tight, stared. And then it moved again, a slow, deliberate slide of muscle and fur through the undergrowth. Mountain lion. My blood ran cold, not deer, not bear, mountain lion. The thought hit me like a punch to the chest. They're supposed to be rare, right? Especially out this close to people. But there it was, clear as day, even in the shadows, the tawny color, the low-slung body, that unmistakable long tail that flicked once, twice as it moved. It was weaving through the trees, low to the ground, moving parallel to me, deeper in the woods. At first, it almost seemed like it was just passing through, heading somewhere else. Maybe I hadn't been seen. Hope flared, fragile as a match in the wind. Maybe if I just stayed still, quiet, it would keep going, and I'd be okay. I held my breath, watching, praying. But then it stopped moving laterally. It turned its head. Even from that distance, even in the shadows, I saw it. Those eyes, pale, almost yellow in the dim light under the trees. And they were fixed on me, not just looking. Watching, calculating. Predator eyes. The kind that see right through you, that size you up, that tell you in a single glance you're nothing more than food. The air went out of me. That fragile hope vanished. This wasn't just passing through, this was interested, this was hunting. Terror, real screaming terror, clamped down on me. My hands went clammy, my legs felt like they'd turned to jelly. I knew instantly, in that flash of primal understanding that strips away everything civilized, everything you tell yourself to feel safe, that I was in deep, deep trouble. Slowly, shaking, I reached down, my fingers fumbling for the grip of the pistol holstered at my hip. Thank God I'd been paranoid. Thank God I'd listened to that nagging voice and packed it, pulled it out, my hand trembling so bad I almost dropped it, aimed it, loosely, in the general direction of those yellow eyes. My voice came out thin, reedy, nothing like the shout I wanted it to be. Hey, get back, get away from me. Stupid, pathetic, like yelling at a force of nature, but I didn't know what else to do. The mountain lion didn't flinch, didn't move, just kept staring, those eyes locked on me, unblinking. It was crouched now, lower, its body tense, muscles coiled like springs under that smooth fur. Tail twitching, the picture of pure, contained power. My mind raced. Back away. Gotta back away. Don't run, they say. Don't run, it'll chase you. Back away. Make yourself look big. Yeah, easy to say when you're not staring down a goddamn mountain lion that looks at you like you're a steak dinner. Slowly, keeping my eyes glued to the cat, I started to move backwards, step by agonizing step. Away from the trees, back towards the power line cut, towards the open ground. Go on, get out of here. My voice was louder now, more frantic. I was yelling for real this time, trying to put some force behind it, trying to sound like I wasn't completely and utterly terrified. The mountain lion moved, but not away. It moved forward. A slow, deliberate step out from under the trees into a patch of sunlight that slanted down through the branches. And Jesus Christ, it was bigger than I thought. Bigger than any house cat, obviously, but bigger than I'd imagined. Long, powerful, all muscle and teeth and claw. Beautiful, in a terrifying, deadly way. It stepped into the sunlight, and the light caught its fur, made it glow almost, and it just stood there in the sun, looking at me, that same steady, chilling gaze. No fear, no hesitation, just assessment. Like it was deciding what angle to come at me from. My heart was hammering so hard I thought it was going to burst out of my chest. My breath hitched, coming in ragged gasps. My hands were slick with sweat, making it hard to hold the gun steady. I was shaking so badly I could barely keep it pointed in the right direction. But I kept backing up, one step, then another. Each step felt like an eternity. I was ahead of her, glancing back every few seconds to make sure she was still with me. We ran and ran and ran until we finally burst out of the trees and into the parking lot. Saw the car, our car, gleaming in the sunlight like a beacon of safety. We practically threw ourselves into it, fumbling with the keys, unlocking the doors. I scrambled into the driver's seat. Mom collapsed into the passenger seat beside me, both of us gasping for breath, shaking uncontrollably. I slammed the door shut, locked it, started the engine with trembling hands, put the car in reverse, backed out of the parking spot way too fast, and sped out of there. Out of the parking lot, back onto the road, away from the trailhead, away from the woods, away from it. As we drove, we looked back towards the trees one last time, just the dark line of the forest against the blue sky. Peaceful, innocent looking. You would never know. And then we heard it. Faintly from behind us, carried on the wind from the direction of the trail we had just fled. A sound, a roar, but not like any animal roar I'd ever heard. Deeper, louder, more animalistic, yes, but also something else. Something almost spectral, like a sound from a nightmare. A long, drawn-out, echoing bellow that seemed to vibrate in the air, in our chests. It sent shivers down my spine, even through the closed car windows. It sounded furious, triumphant, terrifying. It faded as we drove further away, but the sound, that sound, I'll never forget it. It still echoes in my mind sometimes. And the image of that thing, that red, grotesque creature at the edge of the trees, those black, cold eyes staring at us, that's burned into my brain forever. We didn't talk much on the drive home. Just sat there in stunned silence, shaking, trying to catch our breath. When we finally got home, we locked all the doors, closed all the blinds, and just sat in the living room for hours, not saying a word. I don't know what we saw that day. I don't know what threw those rocks at us, what made that smell, what left those shotgun shells on the trail. I have no explanation. All I know is that something was out there, in those woods, something terrifying and angry. And I never want to go back there again, not ever, and I still can't shake the feeling that it's still out there, watching, waiting. Each step put more distance between me and the safety of the trees, but also, it seemed, each step kept the mountain lion interested. It mirrored my movements. Each step back I took, it took a step forward, maintaining that same agonizing distance. 200 yards, the sign back at the parking area had said. 200 yards to get to the edge of the woods. 200 yards of open ground back to my truck. Felt like 200 miles. And every inch of those yards, the mountain lion was there, pacing me, moving in sync with me, always the same distance, those yellow eyes boring into me. Sometimes it would drop lower, almost to the ground, like it was about to pounce, and I'd flinch, yell again, my voice cracking, but it wouldn't pounce, not yet. It was playing with me, torturing me, enjoying my fear. I could feel it. My legs were screaming, burning. My lungs were on fire. I kept backing, kept watching, kept the gun pointed, kept yelling, useless, stupid yells that did nothing but make me sound even more pathetic. Time warped. Seconds stretched into minutes, minutes into years. The sun seemed to stop moving. The wind seemed to hold its breath. Everything was just me, the mountain lion, and the burning, agonizing, slow-motion retreat across that strip of cleared land. And then I saw it. Through the trees, just beyond the edge of the clearing, the cabin. A small, beat-up Forest Service cabin, boarded up probably, but still a building, a solid structure, maybe if I could get to it. A desperate surge of hope, wild and fragile, shot through me. Cabin, safety, maybe. It was further than my truck, way further, but it was cover, it was something. I angled my retreat, moving slightly to my right towards the cabin. The mountain lion adjusted too, mirroring my shift, staying perfectly in line. It hadn't missed a thing. It was like it was reading my mind, anticipating my every move. The ground was rough, uneven, littered with rocks and fallen branches from the clearing. I stumbled, almost went down. My ankle twisted. Pain shot up my leg, sharp and hot. I gasped, nearly lost my footing again. For a split second, my gaze flickered down to see if I'd tripped. Big mistake. In that split second, the mountain lion moved. Faster than I could track, faster than I could even register. One moment it was there, pacing, patient. The next, it was gone, just a blur of tawny fur vanishing into the trees. My heart slammed into my ribs. Oh God, it's coming, it's going to rush me. I braced myself, raising the gun, both hands shaking so violently now I could barely see straight. I was ready to empty the whole damn clip into it, even if it did no good, even if it just pissed it off worse. Silence. Just the rustle of leaves, the distant hum of the power lines, the frantic pounding of my own blood in my ears. Nothing. No sound of movement, no rustling in the undergrowth, just silence. But it wasn't empty silence. It was charged, waiting silence. Silence, full of threat. I scanned the trees, my eyes darting back and forth, trying to pick out any movement, any flash of color, anything. Nothing. It was like it had vanished into thin air, but I knew it was there, somewhere, watching, waiting. My breath hitched. I started backing again, faster now, stumbling over roots and rocks, desperate to reach the cabin. It was closer now, maybe 50 yards, maybe less. I could see the peeling paint, the boarded-up windows, the saggy porch. It looked like it was falling apart, but right now, it looked like paradise. I backed and backed, my eyes glued to the trees, expecting the mountain lion to burst out at any second. Each step was agony, my ankles screaming, my lungs burning, my heart pounding like a drum solo. But I kept going, driven by pure, raw fear, by the instinct to survive. And then I was there. The porch, rotten wood, sagging and groaning under my weight, but solid enough. I scrambled onto it, my feet thudding on the planks, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Still facing the trees, gun still raised, I backed across the porch towards the door. A heavy wooden door, bolted shut from the inside, useless. But then, to the side of the door, a window, small, grimy, also boarded up, but one of the boards was loose, slightly warped, just enough of a gap to maybe... Desperation gave me strength I didn't know I had. I jammed the muzzle of the pistol into the gap, leveraging against the wood, prying, twisting. The board groaned, splintered. More leverage, another twist. The nails screeched, gave way. The board popped loose. Just a small gap, maybe 6 inches wide, but enough to reach through, fumble for the latch on the inside of the window. My fingers scrabbled at the grimy glass, found the latch, fumbled with it, clumsy with fear and adrenaline. It clicked open, sliding window, thank God. I shoved it open just enough to squeeze through, ripping my shirt on the splintered wood of the frame, and I scrambled through, half falling, half diving, into the darkness of the cabin. I landed hard on the floor, the gun clattering out of my hand. Darkness, dust, the smell of old wood and mildew, and blessed, blessed silence. No mountain lion, just quiet. I lay there on the floor, gasping, shaking, every muscle in my body trembling. My ankle throbbed, my heart hammered, sweat poured down my face, stinging my eyes. But I was inside, I was safe, for now. Slowly, cautiously, I pushed myself up, leaning against the wall, my legs still weak and shaky. Reached down, picked up the pistol, my hand still trembling, but not as bad now. Checked the chamber. Still rounds left. Good. I moved to the boarded-up window, peered through the gap. Trees, shadows, sunlight filtering through the leaves. Nothing, no sign of the mountain lion. Was it still out there? Watching? Waiting? I didn't know. Didn't dare to move, didn't dare to breathe too loud. I stayed there, pressed against the wall, peering through the cracks for what felt like hours. The light outside shifted, changed. The shadows lengthened, the air cooled. Still nothing, just silence and the gnawing fear that it was still out there, somewhere, in the trees, unseen, unheard, but still there. Finally, when the shadows grew long and deep and the air turned truly cold, I risked it. Moved to the door, peered through the cracks in the wood. Still nothing. Gingerly, I pushed the bolt, slid it back. The wood groaned. I pulled the door open a crack, just a sliver. Listened. Looked. Empty. The porch, the clearing, the woods, all empty. The mountain lion was gone. Or gone for now. I bolted, ran, ignoring my throbbing ankle, ignoring my burning lungs. I ran as fast as I could, back across the porch, across the clearing, back towards the power line cut, towards the open ground, towards my truck. Didn't stop running until I was back on the road, doors locked, engine roaring, tires spitting gravel as I slammed it into drive and peeled out of there. Drove straight back to town, didn't stop till I was sitting in my apartment, lights blazing, doors locked, gun on the table beside me, shaking so hard I could barely hold a glass of water. Never went back there, never hiked in those mountains again. Sold the cabin rental up there not long after, couldn't stand knowing it was still there, that place. People talk about bears being dangerous, about snakes, about all sorts of stuff in the woods. They're wrong. It's the mountain lions, silent, invisible, intelligent as hell, and cold-blooded killers. They're the real danger out there. They're the ones you never see coming until it's too late. And the worst part, the part that still gets to me, even now, years later, it never attacked, it just stalked me. For 200 yards, it could have taken me any time it wanted. It was toying with me. It was teaching me a lesson, showing me how helpless I really was. And that feeling of being utterly and completely at the mercy of something like that, that's a fear that sticks with you, a fear that doesn't ever really go away. Sometimes even here in the city now, far from any woods, any mountains, sometimes late at night, when everything's quiet, I still get that feeling. That cold prickle on the back of my neck, that sense of something watching me, just out of sight, in the shadows. And I wonder, is it still out there, somewhere in the darkness, remembering me, waiting? Story 3. I was asleep, or at least trying to be, when the first rumble of thunder woke me up. It was distant, a low growl way off, but it was enough to make my stomach clench up. I've always hated thunderstorms, always been terrified of them. It's dumb, I know, but they just freak me out. I laid there in bed listening, and the thunder kept getting closer, louder. Then the first flash of lightning lit up my room, a blinding white strobe through the curtains. For a split second, everything outside my window was sharp and clear. The trees, the fields, and that dark, angry sky boiling with clouds. It was way closer than I thought, maybe 15 miles, 20 tops. My heart started hammering in my chest. I pulled the covers up to my chin, trying to block out the sounds, but it was no use. The storm was coming right for us. Another flash of lightning, closer this time, followed almost immediately by a deafening crack of thunder that rattled the windows. That was it. I couldn't take it anymore. My parents' bedroom was at the back of the house, the side that faced the valley and the woods behind our farm. That's where I always ran when I got scared. Their room felt safe, like nothing could get to me there. I threw back the covers, my legs all tangled in the sheets in my panic, and scrambled out of bed. The floor was cold under my bare feet, and the house felt creepy quiet in between the thunder booms, that deep, expectant silence right before the world explodes again. I padded down the hall, my breath coming fast and shallow. The house was dark except for the flashes of lightning that kept painting these weird, distorted shadows on the walls. I got to my parents' door and pushed it open, creeping into their room. It was pitch black in there, and they were both dead asleep, snoring softly. How could they sleep through this? Didn't they hear the thunder? "Mom? Dad?" I whispered, my voice shaking. No response. They were out cold. I went over to my mum's side of the bed and nudged her shoulder gently. "Mom, wake up. There's a storm." She just mumbled something and rolled over, pulling the covers up higher. I nudged her again, a little harder this time. "Mum, please, I'm scared." Still nothing. It was like they were in a coma. Frustrated and starting to feel really panicky, I went to the window. Their bedroom window looked out over the back fields, towards the woods that stretched for miles behind our property. The window was open a crack, letting in the heavy, humid air and the smell of rain and wet earth. I was just about to close it when I heard it. It was a rustling sound, like something moving through the leaves outside, right below the window. At first, I thought maybe it was one of our dogs. We had 2 big old farm dogs, lazy lab mixes, but they were usually pretty alert at night, especially during storms. They'd bark at anything, a deer, a raccoon, even just the wind sometimes. But they were quiet tonight, eerily quiet. I leaned closer to the window, peering out into the darkness. It was hard to see anything clearly, but the lightning kept flashing, giving these brief, strobe-like glimpses of the yard and the trees at the edge of the woods. I was looking down, trying to see if I could spot one of the dogs, when I saw them. Eyes, 2 eyes, glowing, staring right back at me from the edge of the woods. Not like animal eyes you see reflecting in headlights, but different. These were bright, like embers, a deep burning red-orange color. They weren't reflecting anything. They were glowing from within. They were fixed on me, unblinking, in the darkness. They were just hanging there, about maybe chest height, if it was a person standing up, but there wasn't a body, at least not one I could see. Just the eyes, floating in the dark, glowing. My blood went cold, ice water flooding through my veins. I froze, completely paralyzed. Fear like I'd never felt before, not just storm-scared, but something deeper, something primal, just slammed into me. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't move. I just stared back at those eyes, and they stared back at me. They were intense. That's the only word I can think of. Intense and knowing. Like they were seeing right through me, seeing everything, all my fears, everything I was thinking and feeling. It was awful. The air in the room felt heavy, thick, charged with something wrong. Then slowly, impossibly slowly, the eyes started to move. Not like they were blinking, but like they were drifting. They moved from side to side, weaving between the trees at the edge of the woods, but still fixed on me, never losing eye contact. It wasn't like an animal moving. It was fluid, smooth, unnatural. It was like they were gliding through the air. I wanted to scream, to yell for my parents, but my voice was stuck in my throat. I couldn't make a sound. I was just standing there, frozen to the spot, watching those eyes move through the darkness, this silent, burning gaze fixed on me. The lightning flashed again, brighter this time, and for a split second, the woods were illuminated. I still couldn't see a body, not really, just shadow. A dark, indistinct shape moving behind the trees. Something vaguely human-shaped maybe, but blurry, undefined, with those two glowing red-orange points burning through the shadows. Then, as suddenly as they'd appeared, they were gone. Just vanished. 1 second they were there, those two burning eyes staring at me from the darkness, and the next, nothing. Empty blackness beyond the window. The rustling in the leaves was gone too. Just the wind, the rain starting to pick up now, and the distant rumble of thunder still coming closer. I stood there, pressed against the window frame, my heart pounding like it was trying to break out of my chest. My legs were shaking so bad, I thought they were going to give out. I could feel the sweat beading up on my forehead, cold and clammy. Finally, I managed to gasp out a sound, a choked whisper. "Mom! Dad!" My voice was hoarse, barely audible. I stumbled back from the window, tripping over my own feet, and lurched towards my parents' bed. "Mom! Dad! Wake up! Please!" This time I was shaking them, pulling at their arms, yelling right in their ears. My dad finally stirred, groaning and blinking his eyes open. "Huh? What is it?" he mumbled, sounding totally disoriented. "Dad! There's something outside, something with red eyes. I saw it, outside the window." I was babbling, tripping over my words, my voice tight with panic. My mum woke up too, sitting up in bed and looking at me with this sleepy, annoyed expression. "Ethan, what are you talking about? What's wrong?" "Eyes!" I cried. "Red eyes, glowing, in the woods, right outside the window. They were staring at me." My dad rubbed his eyes, trying to wake up. "Red eyes? What are you talking about, buddy? Probably just a raccoon or something." "No," I insisted, shaking my head frantically. "It wasn't a raccoon. It was, I don't know what it was, but it had red eyes, glowing red-orange eyes, and it was moving in the trees, and it was just staring at me." My mom sighed, the way she always did when she thought I was being dramatic. "Ethan, honey, you were probably just dreaming. You're scared of the storm, that's all. There's nothing outside. Just go back to bed." "I wasn't dreaming," I yelled, my voice cracking. "I swear I saw them, right there, at the edge of the woods. Glowing eyes, red eyes." I was pointing wildly at the window, tears starting to well up in my eyes. My dad finally got out of bed, yawning and stretching. All right, calm down. Let's just take a look, okay? Maybe it was a deer or something, reflecting in the lightning." He went over to the window and peered out into the darkness. He looked for a few seconds, then turned back to me, shaking his head. "I don't see anything, Ethan. Just trees and rain. See? Nothing to be scared of." He closed the window and latched it, drawing the curtains shut. Like that would keep anything out if it was real. But the eyes," I stammered, still trembling. "They were just there. I saw them. You believe me, right? You believe me?" My mom got out of bed too now and came over and put her arm around me. Honey, it's okay. It was just your imagination playing tricks on you. You were scared by the storm, and you just imagined things. It happens. There are no glowing red eyes out there, okay? It was just a bad dream. She ruffled my hair like I was a baby. But the dogs, I whispered, thinking of our labs. They didn't bark. They always bark at stuff outside. Why didn't they bark if there was something there? That bothered me the most. Our dogs barked at shadows. Why were they silent if there was something real, something out there with glowing eyes? My dad shrugged. Maybe they're just sleeping. Or maybe whatever you thought you saw wasn't close enough to the farm to bother them. Dogs are weird sometimes. He wasn't listening. He didn't believe me. Neither of them did. They tucked me back into bed in my room, told me to try and go back to sleep, that everything was fine, just the storm making me jumpy. They left the door open and turned on the little nightlight, like that would make a difference. Like a little plug-in light could protect me from whatever had been out there in the dark with those eyes. I lay in bed, wide awake, listening to the storm rage outside. The rain was coming down harder now, pounding on the roof, and the wind was howling. I kept staring at the shadows in my room, jumping at every creak of the house, every flash of lightning. I couldn't shake the image of those eyes, those burning red-orange eyes staring at me from the darkness. They were burned into my mind, seared into my memory. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just lay there, rigid with fear, watching the darkness, listening to the storm, waiting for those eyes to come back. They didn't. Not that night, anyway. The next morning, everything was different. The sun was shining, the storm had passed, and everything looked bright and normal. Like nothing had ever happened. Like it had all been just a bad dream. But I knew it wasn't a dream. I knew what I had seen. Those eyes, they were real. Something was out there, in the woods behind our farm. Something that watched, something that glowed in the dark. I never told my parents about it again. They would just brush it off, tell me I had an overactive imagination, but I never forgot it. To this day, I can still see those eyes, clear as day, burning in the darkness. And sometimes, especially on stormy nights, when the wind howls and the rain lashes against the windows, I still look out into the dark, and I wonder if they're still out there, watching. I never found out what it was, and honestly, I don't think I want to. Some things are better left unknown. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I get this feeling like something is watching me from the shadows, waiting. And I remember those eyes, and I still get chills. Story 4. It's still so clear in my head, like it was yesterday, even though it was, must be 30 years ago now. Me and Pedro, we were just kids, maybe 10 years old, totally fearless, or so we thought. We'd gotten it into our heads to go riding up into the mountains, just outside of town. Pedro's family had horses, real working horses, not ponies or anything, and his dad even helped us saddle them up, thinking we'd just mess around in the fields behind their place. He didn't know we were planning a real expedition. We took off early, like we were heading to school, then just kept going once we hit the trails at the edge of town. It felt huge that first day, just us, the horses, and all this wild land stretching out in front of us. No parents telling us to be careful, no schedules, just pure freedom. We spent the first day riding through open fields. Then the land started to get steeper, climbing up towards the hills. It was hot, dusty, the kind of summer day that sticks to you, but we were too excited to care. By the second day, we were deep in the Cache Creek Canyon. It was different up there. The air felt cooler, and the trees got taller and thicker, like they were leaning in over the trails. It was way more rugged, and even Pedro, who was usually the cockier one, started to get a bit quieter. The trails narrowed, winding alongside the creek, sometimes crossing it. That canyon had this kind of old feeling, like places you read about in books, full of secrets. There were stories, local legends, about that canyon, Mostly whispers, stuff that adults would brush off. But when you're a kid, those whispers get in your head, you know. Then we came to the bridge. It was this old concrete thing. Looked like it hadn't been used in ages. Parts of the concrete were crumbling away, and you could see right through to the creek bed way below in places where chunks had fallen out. It was seriously rickety, not like a road bridge, more like something left over from logging days, maybe. It was narrow too, just barely wide enough for a horse. Pedro went first, his horse stepping carefully. You could hear the concrete groan under their weight. My horse was being a bit more skittish, but we got across okay both ways, back and forth a few times like idiots. Looking back, I don't know what we were thinking. Just kids pushing boundaries, I guess. We rode deeper into the canyon after that bridge thing, looking for a good spot to let the horses rest and get some water. They were sweating hard, especially after the bridge stunt. We found this little clearing near the creek, pretty shady. Pedro started fussing over the horses, loosening their girths and letting them drink from the creek. I was kind of restless, always was, even then. So I wandered off a bit, not really thinking, just exploring, deeper into the trees, towards the base of this really big cliff that was looming over the clearing. And that's when I smelled it. It hit me all at once, this wave of stink, rotten meat, like something had been dead for a while, mixed with this weird, musty smell like a wet dog, but way stronger, way more feral. It was gross, made my stomach churn a bit. My first thought was a dead elk. Cache Creek Canyon, we knew it was elk country, they migrated through there. And finding elk teeth, ivory, that was like kid gold back then. So, smell or not, I was curious. I followed the smell, which wasn't hard. It was overpowering. It got stronger as I got closer to the base of the cliff. I started looking around in the undergrowth, scanning for a carcass. That's when I saw it. It was standing in the shadows, right at the base of the cliff. Just there. At first, I couldn't really make out what it was. The light was weird under the trees, and the cliff face cast a shadow. But it was big. Really big. Way bigger than anything I'd ever seen standing on two legs. I just saw the top half of it at first, from the waist up maybe, because of the way the cliff sloped down there. My heart did that thing, you know, that thump, thump, thump in your chest like it was trying to jump out. But it wasn't really fear, not at first. It was more like confusion, curiosity maybe. In my 10-year-old brain, I figured it was just some mountain man, a recluse. You hear stories, even back then, about guys who live out in the woods, off the grid. My dad and grandpa had even run into guys like that on hunting trips sometimes. Gruff guys, living rough, but mostly just keeping to themselves. I guess looking back now, that's how my mind tried to make sense of what I was seeing. I didn't have any other frame of reference for something like that, and when I say big, I mean huge. This thing towered. It looked massive, shoulders broader than a doorway, even from just the waist up. I didn't really register the size as unnatural right away. Stupid kid logic, probably thought mountain men just got big, you know? It was dark, I mean the color of it, almost black. It had long, dark hair, kind of matted looking, like dreadlocks but thicker, and a beard that went halfway down its chest, all tangled and greyish silver in places. And it was hairy, covered in hair, even the face, as much as I could see. On top of its head, it had this weird bald patch, not like a normal bald spot, more like raw skin, pinkish and maybe scarred. It looked wrong. It was wearing something, I thought it was a coat at first glance, a black fur coat, but it wasn't a coat. It was just fur, like part of it. Thick dark fur covering its shoulders and chest, rippling as it moved slightly. And under that fur I could see muscles. Not normal muscles, like bodybuilder muscles. These were thick, corded, like cables under skin, rippling and shifting. Monstrous, really. It was staring right at me. Well, not directly at me, more like in my general direction. Its eyes, they were dark, deep set, kind of hidden in the shadows of its brow. I couldn't really make out the color, just darkness looking back at me. And there wasn't anger in its eyes, not hatred, more like annoyance. Like I was bugging it, like it was bothered by me just being there, like a bear that's been woken up from a nap, maybe. That kind of grumpy but not aggressive. Weird, right? Annoyance. But what freaked me out, even more than its size or the smell or the way it looked, was where its eyes kept going. They weren't really focused on me. They kept darting upwards, towards the top of the cliff, over my head, beyond where I could see. It was like it was listening for something, watching for something up there, on the ridge above, completely preoccupied. Like I was just an interruption, a fly buzzing around while it was waiting for something else, something important. We just stood there, staring at each other, me frozen, it mostly seemed bored or preoccupied, just glancing at me now and then back up at the cliff top. It felt like forever, that staring contest. But it was probably only seconds, maybe a minute at most. Time gets weird when you're scared or surprised or whatever the hell I was feeling. Then Pedro yelled, just my name, loud, from the clearing. "Tiago, you coming back? Horses arrested." And that was it. The instant Pedro yelled, the thing reacted. It was like a switch flipped. It moved so fast it was a blur. 1 second it was just standing there, massive and solid in the shadows. The next, it was gone, just gone. I saw it grab onto a rock ledge on the cliff face with one hand. It didn't even seem to need to look, just reached out and gripped this tiny outcropping of rock, like it was nothing. And then, in one fluid motion, it pulled itself up, straight up the cliff face. No scrambling, no struggling, just up. Like gravity didn't apply to it. It was unbelievable. It vanished over the top of the cliff in what felt like seconds. 1 moment there, then gone, like smoke in the wind. I yelled back to Pedro. I don't even remember what I said. Something about, "Did you see that? Did you see him?" I ran back to the clearing, tripping over roots, heart pounding now, not just with curiosity, but real fear starting to creep in. Pedro was just standing there by the horses, looking puzzled. "See what? See who? What are you talking about, Tiago?" He hadn't seen a thing. He was messing with the horses, facing the other way, back towards the creek. I tried to explain, stammering, pointing towards the cliff, babbling about the giant hairy man. But Pedro just looked at me like I was crazy. He hadn't seen anyone. He'd just heard me yelling back. He figured I'd seen a deer or something and was getting excited about it. We rode back down that canyon that afternoon, and the next day got back to town, everything normal again. But it wasn't normal for me. That thing I'd seen stuck with me. I tried to describe it to Pedro a few more times, but he just laughed it off, told me I had an overactive imagination. And eventually, I stopped talking about it. Who would believe me? A 10-year-old kid claiming to have seen a giant hairy man in the mountains. Sounded like a story, not real life. But I never forgot it. Not the smell, not the size, not the way it moved, not the feeling of otherness that just radiated off it. It was always there, in the back of my mind, a weird, unsettling memory that I couldn't quite place. Years went by. Grew up, life happened. That day in Cache Creek Canyon became just another childhood memory, although a strange one. I'd think about it sometimes, mostly just shrug it off, figure it was my kid imagination running wild. Then, years later, I was flipping through channels on TV one night, just bored, and landed on some show about Bigfoot. I almost changed the channel, thought it was dumb, but something made me stop. They showed a drawing, a sketch, supposed to be what witnesses had described, and I froze. It was like a punch to the gut. The drawing, it was him. The face, the hair, the beard, even that weird bald patch. It was like looking at a police sketch of someone I'd actually seen. The description, the size, the way they described it moving, the hairy body, it all clicked. Suddenly, everything made sense. The smell, the size, the way it disappeared up the cliff, the feeling of being watched, but also ignored. It wasn't a mountain man, it wasn't a recluse, it was something else, something not human. It was Bigfoot, I'm telling you, without a shadow of a doubt. That's what I saw that day in Cache Creek Canyon, a real, live Bigfoot. And I was just 10 years old, too stupid, too naive to even be properly scared. Thinking back now, that's the strangest part. I wasn't scared, not really, not in the moment. Confused, yeah. Intrigued, definitely. But not that bone-chilling terror you'd expect from encountering something like that. Maybe because I was a kid, didn't grasp the danger. Maybe because it didn't act aggressive, didn't threaten me. Just observed me, annoyed, waiting for something else. Maybe it could tell I was just a kid, no threat to it, who knows. But the memory, it's always been there, vivid and real. And now, knowing what it probably was, it still doesn't make total sense. What was it doing there? What was it looking at up on the ridge? Why didn't it try to, I don't know, scare me off or attack or whatever? It just stood there watching something unseen. I still go up to Cache Creek Canyon sometimes, hiking, fishing. I haven't been back to that exact spot though. Not really. I don't actively avoid it, but I don't seek it out either. It's like some part of me knows that place holds something unexplained, something big and dark and hairy, watching from the shadows. And to this day, I still get chills thinking about that smell, that rotten meat and wet dog smell. It's not just a memory, it's a physical sensation etched into my brain. And that look in its eyes, that preoccupied annoyance like I was just in the way. I'll never forget that. Never. And Pedro? He still doesn't believe me. Thinks it's a funny story, a tall tale. He laughs about it sometimes, teases me, but I know what I saw. I was there, and I'm still trying to figure out what it was doing there, waiting, in the shadows of that cliff, in the heart of Cache Creek Canyon. I really am. Story 5. Look, I don't even know where to start. I still get messed up thinking about it, even after all these years. It happened way back in '81, in Redwood County up in California. Me and a bunch of my buddies. We were all about getting out into nature back then. We were young, dumb, and thought we were invincible. August '81. Perseid meteor shower was supposed to be amazing that year. So Ethan, being Ethan, always looking for the next adventure, he convinced about 6 or 7 of us to drive up into Redwood. Not just any part of Redwood, mind you, but deep, deep Redwood. We found this spot. It was supposed to be some cabin construction site way off the beaten path, but clearly abandoned or on hold. Just a cleared area surrounded by towering trees, and they had left some lumber piles and the beginnings of what looked like maybe a foundation. Perfect spot for a bunch of guys to rough it and watch some meteors, right? We set up camp, nothing fancy, just tents and a campfire pit we dug. The first night was pure bliss. Clear skies, those gigantic redwood trees silhouetted against the stars. You could actually hear the silence. We hung out around the fire, telling stories, drinking cheap beer, just enjoying being away from everything. After a while, most of the guys were starting to get tired and wandered off to their tents. I was never one to just crash when the sky was putting on a show like that. I stayed out, wrapped in a sleeping bag, just staring up, and man, were those meteors something else. Streaks of light flashing across the blackness, some big ones that burned brighter than anything I'd ever seen. It was almost hypnotic. I lost track of time, just soaking it all in, feeling completely at peace. Then it started. Not the meteors, something else. It wasn't a sound at first, more of a feeling. Like the hair on the back of your neck standing up, but amplified, like every single hair on your body was screaming at you. I can't really describe it other than just this sudden, intense feeling of being watched. But not just watched, like observed from a distance. It was like being scrutinized, examined up close, under a microscope. And it was heavy, oppressive. I scanned the trees surrounding the clearing. Nothing, just shadows and the dark shapes of the redwoods against the faint starlight. My heart started to pound, even though I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything out of the ordinary besides the usual night sounds of the forest. Crickets, maybe an owl hooting far off. But this feeling, it was primal, instinctual fear, pure and raw, slammed into me like a physical force. I decided I'd had enough stargazing. Whatever that feeling was, I didn't like it one bit. I scrambled up, folded my sleeping bag, and hurried back towards the campsite. The fire had died down to embers, casting flickering shadows that danced and writhed in the darkness. As I got closer to the tents, that feeling of being watched didn't go away. It actually intensified. And then I smelled it. God, that smell. I've never smelled anything like it before or since. It hit me like a wall, even through my nose being slightly stuffed up from the cool night air. It was pungent, overpowering, sickeningly sweet, and yet acrid, almost chemical, like a mixture of old engine oil and some kind of musky animal, but amplified to a ridiculous degree, and something else underneath it, something I couldn't place but made my stomach churn. Nauseating, truly nauseating. I stopped dead in my tracks. The smell was thick in the air, hanging heavy and still. It wasn't just a whiff that would pass. It was clinging to everything, coating the back of my throat, making my eyes water. I remember gagging, trying to breathe through my mouth to avoid inhaling too much of it. I called out, my voice shaky even to my own ears. "Hey, anybody smell that?" Silence, then a tent zipper hissing open. Marcus stuck his head out, his face looking groggy and annoyed. "Smell what?" "Dude, it's late. Some of us are trying to sleep." "No, seriously, you don't smell that." I waved my hand in front of my face, trying to waft the stench away, even though it was everywhere. "It's like rotten, oily. I don't even know." Marcus sniffed the air, his annoyance fading, replaced by a look of confusion. "Whoa," he said, wrinkling his nose. "Yeah, I smell something. What the hell is that?" One by one, the other guys emerged from their tents, rubbing sleep from their eyes, but all instantly reacting to the smell. Disgust, confusion, and then a creeping unease settled over us. Nobody had an explanation for it. We checked the campfire, thinking maybe some trash had fallen in and was burning weirdly, but it was just embers and ash. The smell wasn't coming from there anyway. It was everywhere. "Maybe an animal died," someone suggested half-heartedly. "Died right next to our tents, and smells like this?" Another guy replied, skeptical, "And I don't remember smelling anything like this earlier." Marcus, always the pragmatist, stepped forward, grabbing his flashlight. "All right, let's figure this out. Has to be something. Let's see where it's coming from." We all had that feeling, the same unspoken thought hanging in the air. Whatever was causing that smell wasn't natural, wasn't normal. And that feeling of being watched, it hadn't gone away. If anything, it was stronger now, like whatever was watching was getting closer, drawn by the smell, or maybe causing it. It was irrational, I know, but that's how it felt. We fanned out, flashlights cutting through the darkness, trying to pinpoint the source of the stench. It seemed to be strongest. Over that way, towards the denser trees to the north of the clearing, where the lumber piles were stacked. We moved in that direction, our flashlights bobbing in the darkness, the silence of the forest broken only by our footsteps and nervous whispers. As we got closer to the trees, the smell became almost unbearable, thick and cloying, making my eyes water and my stomach churn. And then we heard it. A sound that stopped us all in our tracks, freezing us like statues. It was a heavy thud, followed by the snapping of branches, loud and distinct in the stillness of the night. Like something massive moving through the undergrowth, breaking branches and crushing leaves underfoot. "What the hell was that?" someone hissed, his voice barely above a whisper. Marcus pointed his flashlight towards the direction of the sound. Over there, in the trees. We shone our flashlights into the darkness, the beams dancing wildly, catching glimpses of tree trunks and shadows, but nothing concrete. Then we heard it again. Another heavy thud, closer this time, followed by more snapping branches. It was definitely moving, and moving fast, and moving away from us, deeper into the forest. The initial curiosity, the desire to figure out the smell, was instantly replaced by a wave of pure, unadulterated fear. This wasn't a deer crashing through the bushes, or a bear. This was something big, something heavy, moving with purpose and anger. It was hard to describe the feeling that sound evoked, but it wasn't just the sound itself. It was the weight behind it, the sense of immense size and power. Let's just go back to camp, I stammered, my voice trembling. Maybe it's just some animal looking for food or something. We should just leave it alone. Some of the other guys were nodding, their faces pale in the flashlight beams. Even Marcus, usually so sure of himself, looked shaken. But a couple of them, maybe fueled by adrenaline or just plain stupid bravado, were still pushing forward. No, wait. Let's see what it is. We're already here. Might be a bear or something. We should at least scare it off. One of them, Kevin, even pulled out a hunting knife he always carried. Another, Mark, had a small axe we used for firewood. 3 of us, including me, were unarmed. Against my better judgment, and feeling a knot of dread tightening in my stomach, I followed them as they pushed further into the trees, following the sounds of crashing undergrowth. The smell was now almost overpowering, making me want to vomit. The heavy footsteps were becoming fainter as whatever it was moved further away. We reached a point where the trees grew denser, the undergrowth thicker, making it harder to move. It was pitch black under the canopy, the flashlight beams struggling to penetrate the darkness. The sounds of movement had stopped, silence again, but not the peaceful silence from earlier. This was a heavy, oppressive silence, charged with something. Then the smell came back, stronger than ever, like it was right on top of us. And then we heard it. Not footsteps this time, something else. A low growl, deep and guttural, vibrating in the air, resonating in our chests. It wasn't like any animal growl I'd ever heard. It was too low, too rumbling, too unnatural. And it was close, incredibly close. Terror, pure, unadulterated terror, gripped me. My heart hammered against my ribs, my breath caught in my throat. I wanted to run, to scream, but I was paralyzed by fear. And I wasn't the only one. Even Kevin and Mark with their weapons stood frozen, their bravado gone, replaced by wide-eyed horror. Then came the scream. It wasn't human, it wasn't animal, it was unearthly. High-pitched, piercing, a shriek of pure agony and rage, ripping through the night, echoing through the trees, making my blood run cold. It was followed by a series of horrific sounds, thrashing, snapping, something heavy crashing through the undergrowth towards us. That scream, that sound, it broke something in us. All pretense of bravery, all curiosity, all rational thought evaporated. Survival instinct took over, raw and primal. We didn't even need to say anything. We just turned and ran. We scrambled back through the trees, stumbling, tripping, blinded by fear and the darkness, desperate to get back to the clearing, back to the camp, back to anywhere that wasn't there. The horrific screams and crashing sounds pursued us through the darkness, getting closer, louder, more terrifying with every step. I didn't look back. I just ran, fueled by adrenaline and pure, unadulterated panic. I could hear the others behind me, gasping, sobbing, crashing through the undergrowth. We were all just trying to escape, to get away from whatever unholy horror we had stumbled upon in the dark woods. We burst back into the clearing, lungs burning, legs aching, hearts pounding like drums in our chests. We didn't stop running until we were back at the campfire, huddled together, panting, shaking, staring back into the trees, expecting something to emerge. But nothing did. The screams had stopped. The crashing sounds had faded away. The forest was silent again, except for our ragged breathing. The smell was still there, lingering in the air, a nauseating reminder of what we had just experienced. We didn't speak for a long time. Just sat there huddled together, the flickering embers of the campfire casting grotesque shadows on our faces, the terror still clinging to us like a shroud. Finally, Marcus spoke, his voice hoarse and shaky. What the hell was that? Nobody had an answer. We didn't know. We didn't even want to guess. The sheer terror we had felt was too overwhelming, too incomprehensible to process. Whatever we had encountered out there in the darkness, it wasn't natural, it wasn't something we understood, and it was terrifying beyond anything we could have imagined. We stayed up the rest of the night, huddled around the fire, too scared to sleep, too scared to even move. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the trees, we started to pack up. We didn't say much, just moved in a daze, our minds still reeling from the night's horrors. We got out of there as fast as we could, not even stopping to eat breakfast, just throwing everything in the cars and driving away, putting as much distance as possible between us and those woods. We didn't talk about it much after that, not really. It was like we all collectively agreed to bury it, to pretend it never happened, but it did happen, and it stayed with us. The nightmares, the jumpiness, the lingering fear that would prickle at the back of my neck whenever I was in the woods or even just in a dark place. 2 days later, I got a call from Marcus. His voice was strained, tight. "Ethan, you sitting down?" "Yeah, why?" "You remember that smell from the woods?" "Yeah, how could I forget?" My stomach clenched at just the memory. "Well," he said, taking a deep breath, "Mark and Kevin, they went back." "Back? Back to Redwood? Why?" I couldn't believe it. After what we'd experienced. Stupidity, I guess. Kevin especially, he's stubborn as hell, said he couldn't let it go, needed to know what it was. And Mark went with him. They went back to the campsite this morning. And? My heart was pounding again. A cold dread washed over me. They found something. His voice was barely a whisper, near where our tents were, by the lumber pile. "What did they find, Marcus? Just tell me." "Shit, Ethan. They found droppings. Animal, I guess, but Jesus Christ, it was huge. Like bigger than my dog. Way bigger. And it stank, man. Just like that smell. Exactly like that smell." Silence stretched between us, thick and heavy with unspoken terror. They said it was black. Like tar, and there were bones in it. Small bones. Animal bones, they think. My blood ran cold. Bones. In excrement. Of something that big. Something that smelled like that. Something that screamed like that. They freaked out, Ethan. They took pictures, but they just got the hell out of there again. They're not going back. Neither am I. He hung up. I sat there for a long time, staring out the window, the phone still clutched in my hand. Droppings, huge black bone-filled droppings, left right by our tents. 2 days after we'd run for our lives from something in the dark woods. I never saw those pictures. I didn't want to. I didn't want to know any more than I already did. I know it sounds crazy. I know people will say it was just a bear or a mountain lion or some wild animal, but it wasn't. It couldn't have been. Not with that smell, not with that scream, not with that feeling of utter primal terror. And definitely not with droppings like that. To this day, I have no idea what we encountered in those woods that night. But I know, deep down, in a place that chills me to the bone, that it was something else. Something that doesn't belong. Something that shouldn't exist. And the thought that it might still be out there somewhere, hidden in the darkness of the redwood forest, that's the thing that really haunts me. I still smell that smell sometimes, just faintly, in my dreams. And I still hear that scream echoing in the back of my mind. And I know with chilling certainty that whatever it was watching us. It was always watching us. Story 6. Man, I still get chills thinking about it, even after all these years. It's not something you just shake off, you know. This was back in the early 80s. I was living in San Francisco at the time, young and dumb, thinking I'd seen it all. City life, you get that kind of arrogance, like nothing can really surprise you. Boy, was I wrong. Every few weekends I'd drive up north to this place a buddy of mine, Ricardo, had. 40 acres, way up in Pinho Alto, Northern California. Middle of nowhere, basically. Just miles and miles of woods, thick as you can imagine, surrounding this tiny town. Ricardo inherited the land from some relative and was trying to fix up this old cabin that was on it. No real plans for it, just a project, a place to get away from the city noise. For me, it was perfect. I needed to breathe some real air, get out of the concrete jungle. Plus, Ricardo's a good guy, good company. So I'd head up there on Friday nights, stay till Sunday. We'd chop wood, hike around, try to patch up the cabin, drink beers, you know the drill. It was peaceful, really peaceful. The kind of quiet you only get when you're miles from anywhere, surrounded by nothing but trees. At first, that silence was amazing, like a blanket wrapping around you. But then, after a few trips, things started feeling different. Subtle at first. You know how it is in the woods. Sounds travel weirdly. We'd be working on the cabin, and I'd swear I'd hear something. A thump, like someone knocking on wood, but distant. Dismissed it at first. Figured it was just animals, branches falling, the usual forest noises. Ricardo heard it too, once or twice. We'd look at each other, shrug, and get back to whatever we were doing. Then it started happening more. Not just one thump, but sometimes a series of them, almost like a rhythm, like someone was intentionally hitting something. Dunk, dunk, dunk. Always off in the woods, never close enough to pinpoint. And always just when things got quiet, like the forest was holding its breath, then dunk, dunk, dunk. We tried to joke about it. Maybe it was a woodpecker on steroids, or some crazy old mountain man out there doing, what? Woodworking in the middle of the night? We'd laugh, but there was a little edge to it, you know, because the woods around Pinho Alto, they weren't just regular woods. They felt old, heavy, like they'd seen things, and you could get lost in them so damn easily. Cell service was non-existent back then, and even now, I doubt you'd get much. You were just out there. One Saturday, we decided to hike further into Ricardo's land. He had some vague idea about clearing a trail down to a creek he thought was on the property line. We packed some sandwiches, water and a hatchet and set off. The sun was shining, it was a beautiful day, crisp fall air. At first, it was great. Hiking through the trees, leaves crunching under our boots, smelling the pine and damp earth, felt good to be away from everything. But as we went deeper, the woods changed. The trees got taller, thicker, closer together. The sunlight started to fade, even though it was still mid-afternoon. It got darker and colder. The air felt heavier. And the silence changed again too. It wasn't peaceful anymore. It was watchful, like something was listening. We kept talking, making noise just to fill the silence, cracking jokes, reminiscing about stupid stuff from college. Anything to not have to really listen to the woods. But then the knocking started again. Dunk, dunk, dunk. Closer this time, or maybe it just sounded closer in the thicker woods. Hard to tell. We stopped talking, listened. Dunk, dunk, dunk. Definite wood sound, like hitting a hollow log with something hard. It was coming from deeper in the woods, further uphill. Ricardo looked at me, eyes a little wider than usual. Woodpecker, he mumbled, trying to sound casual. Woodpeckers don't knock like that, I said. My voice sounded too loud in the sudden quiet. And they're usually active during the day, not the middle of the damn woods at whenever this is. I glanced at my watch. Almost 4 p.m. Sun was already getting low behind the dense canopy. Dunk, dunk, dunk. Closer still, or so it seemed. Definite rhythm, intentional. We stood there, frozen for a moment, just listening. Then Ricardo said a little too fast, "Okay, you know what? Creek's probably further than I thought. Sun's going down. Let's head back." I didn't argue. Not one bit. We turned around and started walking back the way we came, faster than we'd walked in. Not running, but definitely picking up the pace. The knocking stopped. As soon as we turned around, just stopped. We didn't talk about it on the way back to the cabin. Just walked, kept looking around. Every shadow seemed to move. Every rustle of leaves made us jump. It was getting properly dark by the time we got back to the cabin. We locked the doors, even though it felt kind of pointless in the middle of nowhere. Lit a fire, drank way more beers than usual that night. Tried to convince ourselves it was nothing, just woods being woods, but neither of us really believed it. The next day, Sunday, was quieter. Too quiet. The usual birds and squirrels seemed to be gone. Even the wind seemed to have died down. Just silence. But not the peaceful kind, more like a waiting silence, like something was holding its breath. We packed up our stuff to head back to the bay. Ricardo was driving his old pickup truck. We threw our bags in the back, said goodbye to the cabin and got in. Ricardo turned the key, the engine sputtered, coughed, and finally turned over. Relief washed over me. Getting out of there felt like the right thing to do. We drove down the dirt road, leading away from the cabin, back towards the main logging road. Ricardo was driving faster than usual, kicking up dust. Neither of us said much, just glanced at each other every now and then. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. We reached the logging road, made a left, heading towards the highway, almost out of the woods, almost back to normal. And then, bang! Loud pop from the back of the truck. The truck swerved. Ricardo wrestled with the steering wheel, pulled over to the side of the road. Flat tire. Back right. Great. Just freaking great. We got out, looked at the tire, sighed. Of course. In the middle of nowhere, on a deserted logging road with the sun starting to set. Perfect. Ricardo opened the tailgate, started digging for the spare and the jack. The logging road was narrow, dirt and gravel, trees pressing in close on both sides. Even darker here than it was back at the cabin, the canopy was so thick. The sun was almost gone, dipping behind the ridge of trees. We worked in silence, just the sounds of the tools, the grunts of effort, the occasional curse word under our breath. Ricardo got the jack set up, started cranking. I was loosening the lug nuts on the flat. The air was getting colder fast. The shadows were long and twisted, stretching out from the trees like fingers. And then we heard it. Not the knocking this time, something else. A sound from uphill, from the woods above the road on the ridge. At first, it was faint, just a low rumble. But it got louder, fast. A heavy, breathing sound, like someone or something, huge, taking deep, slow breaths. Ha, woo, ha, woo. It wasn't like animal breathing, not like a dog panting or a bear huffing. This was deeper, slower, more powerful, like bellows, huge bellows pushing air in and out. Ha, woo. The sound echoed through the woods, bouncing off the trees, making the air vibrate. I froze, lug wrench halfway turned. Ricardo stopped cranking the jack, just stared up the slope into the trees. His face went white. My blood ran cold. I'd grown up on a farm in Ohio, been around animals my whole life. Cows, horses, pigs, chickens, you name it. Heard every kind of animal sound you can imagine. This wasn't any animal I'd ever heard, or could even imagine. Ha, whoo. The breathing was coming from just above us, maybe 50, 100 feet up the hill, in the trees, just there, watching, listening, breathing. The silence in between the breaths was just as terrifying as the sound itself. A thick, heavy silence. Like everything else in the woods was holding its breath too, waiting, listening, along with us. Ricardo whispered, voice cracking, What is that?" I shook my head. Didn't know, didn't want to know, just Pure, raw fear, gripping my gut, squeezing the air out of my lungs. I felt it in my chest, a cold knot of terror. Goosebumps erupted all over my arms, my neck, my back, hair standing on end, heart hammering in my ears. Ha! Whoo! Closer now, or sounding closer, hard to tell. The woods played tricks with sound, but it felt closer, felt like it was moving, coming down the slope, towards us. Ricardo dropped the jack handle. It clattered on the gravel road. We both just stared up into the trees. Dark shadows, branches reaching out like claws, rustling leaves in the faint breeze that had suddenly sprung up, but nothing visible, just the sound, the breathing. Ha! Woo! We gotta go, Ricardo stammered. He took a step back from the truck, towards the downhill side of the road, away from the breathing, away from the trees. I didn't need to be told twice. I dropped the lug wrench, forgot about the flat tire, forgot about everything except getting the hell out of there. We both scrambled around to the downhill side of the truck, stumbled down the embankment into the ditch alongside the road. Didn't even look back, just ran downhill along the road, away from the breathing sound, ran as fast as we could, pumping arms, legs churning, lungs burning, branches whipping our faces, thorns scratching our arms. Didn't care, just had to get away. We ran and ran, didn't stop, didn't look back, just kept running until we burst out of the dense trees, down onto a wider section of the logging road, where the trees thinned out a bit. Stopped then, gasping for breath, hands on our knees, chests heaving. Listened. Silence. Just the sound of our own ragged breathing and the faint rustle of leaves in the wind. The breathing sound. Gone. Or too far away to hear now. Either way, gone for now. We stood there for a minute, maybe more, just catching our breath, trying to get our hearts to slow down. Staring back up the road, towards the dark line of trees, the ridge where we'd heard the sound. Nothing, just shadows and silence. Ricardo was pale, sweating even though it was cold. I was shaking so bad my teeth were chattering. We looked at each other. Neither of us said anything for a long time. What was there to say? Finally, Ricardo croaked out, What the hell was that?" I shook my head again. "Don't know. Don't want to know." We didn't go back for the truck. We walked all the way down the logging road for what felt like forever. Sun was completely gone now, pitch black. Just the faint glow of stars above, barely visible through the trees overhead. We stumbled along in the darkness, tripping over roots, rocks, branches. Every shadow looked like something moving. Every sound made us jump. We finally reached the main highway, hours later. It was almost midnight. Completely exhausted, scared out of our minds. We flagged down a passing car, some poor guy in a beat-up station wagon who looked at us like we were crazy. But he stopped, listened to our shaky story, and drove us the rest of the way to Ricardo's truck in the Bay Area. Next day, Ricardo and I went back up to Pinho Alto in broad daylight with another friend, Mark. Told Mark we just had a flat tire, needed help getting the truck. Didn't tell him about the breathing, didn't want to think about it. We drove up in Mark's car, went back to the logging road, found Ricardo's truck, still sitting there with the flat tire. The spare was still in the back, untouched. We changed the tire in the daylight, quick and efficient, like nothing had happened. Didn't see anything, didn't hear anything. Just the normal sounds of the woods in the daytime, birds chirping, wind rustling the leaves. Seemed normal, almost like it had all been a bad dream. We got the truck running, drove it back to Ricardo's place. Packed up my stuff, said goodbye. Drove back to San Francisco, felt like I was leaving something behind, something I couldn't shake. I never went back to Pinho Alto, never wanted to. Ricardo sold the land a couple of years later, says he couldn't stand the thought of going back there either. We don't talk about it much. It's like something we both just want to forget. But we can't. Not really. Sometimes, late at night, when everything's quiet, I'll hear it again. In my head. The heavy breathing, ha, hoo, and I get that same cold knot of fear in my gut, the same feeling of being watched, the same unexplainable dread. I don't know what it was we heard that night in the woods. Don't know if it was an animal or something else. And honestly, I don't think I ever want to find out. Some things are better left unknown. Out there in the dark woods, breathing, waiting, and I hope I never hear that sound again for as long as I live. It was too real, too terrifying, and to this day, I have no explanation. Story 7. Okay, so, I don't usually talk about this kind of stuff, especially online. Feels a little out there, you know? But I saw this thread, and something just clicked. Like maybe there are other people who get it. So here it goes. It was last fall, October maybe. Yeah, definitely October because the leaves were turning, and there was that crispness in the air that just smells like fall, like wood smoke and dying leaves. I needed to get away, just away. Life had been heavy, I guess is the word. Lost my aunt, work was stressing me out, and honestly, just the general noise of everyday life was getting to me. I'm a veteran Marine Corps, served 2 tours. You learn to handle stress, but sometimes you just need to find a quiet place to reset, you know? I grew up in southern Ohio, way down in the hills. It's beautiful country, and Salt Fork Lake State Park near Cambridge. I know it pretty well. Big lake, lots of woods, usually pretty quiet, especially if you know where to go. I figured a day out there, maybe even overnight, was exactly what I needed. So, I packed up my old camping gear, nothing fancy, just a tent, sleeping bag, some food, water, and drove out there early one Saturday morning. I wasn't really planning on camping officially, in a campsite or anything. Too many people, even in October. I was aiming for true solitude. I wanted to get off the marked trails, way back into the woods where most folks don't bother going. I parked at one of the less crowded access points, near the dam, but away from the main beach area. Lake was calm that morning, almost glassy. The air was cool, but the sun was already starting to get a bit of warmth to it. Perfect day for being outside. I started walking along the shoreline, away from the parking lot, heading west. There's a section of the lake there, pretty secluded, with these rocky banks and patches of trees that come right down to the water's edge. I found a spot where it was flat enough to sit, big flat rock right near the water. Nobody around. Perfect. I sat down, leaned back against a tree, and just breathed. Felt good to be away from everything. After a while, I got this urge to sing, kind of. I know it sounds weird, not like singing songs you hear on the radio. More like vocalizing. I'd been messing around with this thing called throat singing after watching some documentary about Mongolian music. It's supposed to be good for centering yourself or something like that. Honestly, I just like the sound of it. This deep, rumbling drone you can make. So I started doing that, just humming low notes, letting the sound rumble up from my chest and out. It echoes off the water, and it's actually kind of hypnotic, I guess. I closed my eyes and just focused on the vibrations, the feel of the sound in my body, the cool air on my face. It was peaceful, really peaceful. For a while. Then it happened. Out of nowhere. Thwack. Just a sharp, solid sound, like something hitting a tree or a rock. My eyes snapped open. I looked around, heart suddenly pounding in my chest. Silence. Just the usual sounds of the woods, birds chirping, a squirrel rustling in the leaves. But that thwack sound, it was distinct, and it had come from just over there to my left, a little bit inland, away from the lake. I scanned the trees. Nothing, no one. I told myself it was probably just a branch falling, maybe a bird startled something, making a rock roll downhill. Yeah, that's got to be it. But my gut was telling me something different. There was this prickling sensation on the back of my neck, that feeling like you're being watched. I tried to shrug it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, but the feeling wouldn't go away. Then, thwack again. Closer this time, definitely closer, and this time I saw it. A small rock, about the size of my fist, bounced off the rock I was sitting on, just a couple of feet to my right. It skittered into the water with a small splash. Okay, that was not a falling branch. That was a rock. Someone threw a rock. But who? I was completely alone. I stood up quickly, looking around in every direction. Still nothing, no movement, just trees and bushes and the lake. But I knew someone had thrown that rock. And the way it was aimed, it wasn't just random. It felt directed at me. A cold shiver ran down my spine. Even though the sun was out, I felt this sudden, overwhelming urge to get out of there. This peace I had been feeling just moments ago vanished, replaced by a knot of anxiety in my stomach. I didn't like this, not one bit. Just then, I saw someone walking along the lakeshore, further down towards the dam. It was Mark, a buddy of mine from work. He's into hiking and outdoorsy stuff too. I waved him over, glad to see a familiar face. He came over grinning. "Jeff! Hey man! Didn't expect to see you out here." "Hey Mark." "Yeah, just needed to get away from it all," I said, trying to sound casual, even though I was still feeling pretty rattled. "You hiking?" "Yeah, thought I'd do a loop around the lake. Beautiful day for it. Everything all right?" He must have seen something on my face because he suddenly looked concerned. Yeah, fine. Just a little weirded out. Someone threw a rock at me," Mark frowned. "Seriously? Who?" He looked around. "I don't see anyone." "Exactly," I said, pointing to the woods. "Came from over there in the trees, but I didn't see anyone. Heard something before that too, sounded like someone messing with branches maybe. And then the rocks." Mark listened, his expression getting more serious. "He knows I'm not the type to freak out over nothing. That's strange, man. You sure you just weren't hearing things?" "No, I'm sure. I saw the rock bounce off the ground, heard the first one hit something over there." I gestured towards the trees again. "Look, it's probably just some kids screwing around, right? But it felt, I don't know, weird, creepy." Mark nodded slowly. "Yeah, I get it. Look, you want to hike together. Safety in numbers, right?" I felt a wave of relief wash over me. "Yeah, man, that'd be great. Actually, you know what? Let's go check out that old trail, the one that goes up into the park interior. We've talked about hiking it before, haven't we?" Mark looked a little hesitant. "You mean the unmaintained trails? Isn't that off limits?" "Yeah, kind of. But that's where you really get away from people, right? If we're looking for peace and quiet." I didn't want to say it out loud, but honestly, I also felt safer going into the woods, into a place where maybe whoever was throwing rocks wouldn't follow. Stupid logic, maybe, but it made sense to me in that moment. Mark considered it for a second. "All right, why not? Let's do it. We can cut back into the woods over there." He pointed to a break in the trees where I knew there was an old, overgrown trail that wasn't on any of the park maps anymore. Locals know about it, but most tourists don't even realize it's there. It goes deep into the park's interior, further away from the lake and the regular trails. So we headed that way, walking away from the shoreline into the trees. The woods immediately got thicker, the sunlight dappling through the leaves, casting long shadows. It felt different in here, quieter, more closed in. The marked trails near the lake are pretty open. You can usually see through the trees for a good distance, but this was dense. Real woods. We walked in silence for a while, just the sound of our boots crunching on the leaves and the occasional bird call. The further we went, the more the uneasy feeling started to return. It was probably just my nerves from the rock thing, but the silence in these woods felt heavy, oppressive. It wasn't just peaceful quiet, it was something else. After maybe half an hour of walking deeper and deeper into the park, we stopped to catch our breath. Mark took a swig from his water bottle. "So, you still feeling spooked?" he asked, looking around. "Yeah," I admitted. "Still a little on edge. It's probably nothing. just my imagination running wild. I wanted to believe that. I really did. Then we heard it. It was faint at first, just barely audible. A sound carried on the breeze, or maybe it was even underneath the sounds of the woods. I stopped walking, cocking my head, listening intently. Mark stopped too, sensing something in my posture. "Did you hear that?" I whispered. He listened for a moment. "Hear what?" "Just birds." "No, listen. Closer." And then it came again, clearer this time. A sound that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Laughter. But not adult laughter. Children, little kids, muffled, distant, but definitely laughter. And talking. Indistinct voices, too low to make out words, but undeniably the chatter of children. My blood ran cold. We were miles from any marked trails, deep in a section of the park that's supposed to be practically deserted. No campsites back here, no picnic areas, just woods. Dense, isolated woods. What the hell would children be doing out here? And why did it sound so strange? The laughter was high-pitched, almost giggling, but it had an odd quality to it, like it was coming from far away, even though it sounded close by at the same time. And the voices, they weren't clear. They were mumbled, garbled, like they were talking underwater or something. Mark's face had gone pale. What is that?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I don't know," I said, my voice tight, "but that's kids. Definitely kids." We stood there, frozen, listening. The laughter and chatter continued, sometimes fading slightly, then getting a little louder again, always indistinct and unsettling. It felt like it was surrounding us, coming from all directions, even though that was impossible. We were in the middle of nowhere. There shouldn't be any children here. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it stopped, just cut off. Silence, complete and utter silence. The birds stopped chirping, even the wind seemed to die down. Just nothing, except for the pounding of my own heart in my ears. We stood there for what felt like forever, just staring at each other, eyes wide with fear. The silence was worse than the laughter had been. It was heavy, expectant, like something was waiting, listening, watching. Mark finally found his voice trembling slightly. "Jeff, what the hell was that?" I shook my head, my mind completely blank. I don't know. I have absolutely no idea. The fear was no longer just a prickle on my neck. It was a cold, gripping hand around my chest, squeezing the air out of my lungs. I felt sick to my stomach. Whatever that was, it wasn't normal. It wasn't right. Kids shouldn't be laughing like that in the middle of nowhere, in woods this deep. And then just vanish? Go silent like that? We just stood there, rooted to the spot, for another minute, maybe longer. Neither of us dared to move, dared to speak. The silence pressed down on us, suffocating. It felt alive somehow, like the woods themselves were holding their breath, waiting. Finally, I took a shaky breath. We need to get out of here," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. Mark nodded, his eyes still wide with shock. Yeah, let's go, now." We turned around, not even bothering to look behind us, and started walking back the way we came. Fast. Almost running. We didn't speak, didn't even look at each other, just walked as fast as we could, pushing through the undergrowth, stumbling over roots, not caring if we tripped or fell. We just needed to get out of those woods. It felt like we walked for hours, though it was probably only 20 minutes, maybe half an hour at most. But every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig made us jump. The silence of the woods seemed to follow us, even as we started to get closer to the edge of the park, closer to the lake and the familiar trails. Finally, we broke through the trees and saw the sunlight glinting off the water. We stumbled out onto one of the marked trails, panting, sweating, our hearts still racing. We didn't stop until we were back at the lakeshore, back in the open, where we could see other people, even though there weren't many around. We sat down on a bench near the water, completely drained, shaking. Neither of us said anything for a long time. We just sat there, trying to catch our breath, trying to process what had just happened, trying to understand, and failing. Eventually, Mark spoke, his voice still shaky. I don't know what to say, man. I've never heard anything like that before. Ever. I shook my head, still speechless. Me neither, I whispered. Me neither. We stayed there for a while longer, until the feeling of immediate panic started to subside, replaced by a deep, lingering unease. We walked back to our cars in silence and drove home. I haven't been back to that part of the park since. And honestly, I don't know if I ever will. I've told a few people about it, close friends, but most of them just looked at me like I was crazy. You probably just imagined it, they'd say. Woods can play tricks on your ears. Or maybe it was just some teenagers messing around playing a prank. But I know what I heard. We both know what we heard, and it wasn't teenagers, and it wasn't my imagination. It was something else. Something I can't explain. Something that still chills me to the bone when I think about it. The laughter, the voices, the silence, deep in those woods. I don't know what it was, and part of me is terrified to ever find out. It just stopped, just like that, and I still can't make sense of any of it. To this day, I still get the chills. Just thinking about it now, I can almost hear it again. Story 8. This was back in '86. Fall, late October, early November. Definitely getting cold. Oak County, Ohio. Deep woods. Wayne National Forest area. I know those woods like the back of my hand. Been hunting there since I was a kid with my dad. This particular spot. It was kind of out of the way, near some old abandoned coal mines, deeper in than most guys bothered to go. I liked it that way. Less people, more deer. Built myself a decent little stand that year, overlooking a good trail, thick woods all around. Prime deer territory. It was early morning, real early, still dark. Fog was thick, like pea soup. The kind of fog that hangs low to the ground, makes everything muffled and damp. Air was biting cold, the kind that cuts right through you even with layers on. I was up in my stand, bundled in my hunting gear, thermos of coffee at my side. Just sitting, waiting for the light to come up, listening to the woods wake up. The silence was heavy. You know that wood silence? It's not really silent, not completely. There are little sounds, rustling leaves, maybe a twig snapping, the wind whispering through the trees, but overall it's quiet, deep quiet. And that morning with the fog, it was even quieter, like the fog was swallowing sound itself. Then I heard it. At first I couldn't place it. It was weird, a low hum, almost a vibration, faint but definitely there. My first thought, and I know this is going to sound dumb, but honestly, my first thought was bees. Like maybe I was near a hive somehow. Stupid, I know. It was freezing cold. No way bees would be out. But the sound, it had that kind of buzz to it. I strained my ears, trying to figure out where it was coming from, what it was. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't animal sounds. It was something else. Something unnatural. And as I listened, the hum got a little louder, a little stronger. It started to vibrate in my chest a bit. Not loud, not painful, just there. Like the air itself was humming. I remember feeling uneasy. That prickling feeling you get on the back of your neck when something's not right. I shifted in my stand, scanning the woods around me through the fog. Visibility was crap, maybe 50 feet in any direction max. Everything was grey and muted, the trees disappearing into the swirling mist. Then I saw movement. Out of the corner of my eye to my left, through a break in the fog. Something big, dark, moving slow. My hunter instincts kicked in immediately. Bear. Black bear territory out there, though they're not common that deep in. Could be. My heart started to pound a little harder, got my rifle ready but kept it down, still watching, trying to get a better look through the fog. It was getting closer. Coming from deeper in the woods, moving towards a small clearing near a pond I knew was there, just beyond my stand. As it got closer, the hum got stronger too, almost resonating in the stand itself now. It wasn't just a sound anymore, it was a feeling. And then it stepped fully out of the fog. Not a bear. Oh hell no, not a bear. It was a woman, but not human. Not exactly. Jesus Christ, I still see her in my dreams sometimes. She was huge, towers. I'm 6 feet, maybe a bit over. Looking up at her, she must have been 6, 7 feet tall, easy, maybe taller. Hard to tell exactly, with the fog and the trees behind her, but she dwarfed everything around her. And she wasn't bulky, not like a man that size would be. She was built, like a woman, but just amplified. Everything about her was feminine, but gigantic. She had curves, a waist, breasts, just enormous, proportionate somehow, but wrong. So wrong. Her skin, it was pale, very pale, almost white, but with a hint of grey. In the fog, it was hard to tell for sure, but it wasn't a healthy human pale. More like bone china, smooth. And her hair, dark, black maybe, or a very deep brown, hanging down her back, past her waist. Thick, heavy-looking hair. She was wearing nothing much, just rags, really. Bits of what looked like animal hides wrapped around her chest and lower body. Bare arms, bare legs. In the freezing cold fog. That should have been impossible. I was bundled up like the Michelin Man, and I was still cold, and she was just strolling along in what amounted to scraps of leather. No goosebumps, no shivering, nothing. But the thing that nailed me to the stand, that made my blood run cold, wasn't her size, or her clothes, or her skin. It was what she was holding. In her arms, cradled like a baby, she held something, small, covered in fur, moving, a creature. I couldn't make out details at first, just a bundle of dark fur nestled against her chest. And as she walked, as she moved closer to the pond, she was humming. That sound, the humming. It wasn't coming from around her anymore. It was coming from her throat. A low, resonant hum, like a giant purring or, I don't know, something primal, something ancient. It filled the air, vibrated through me, even up in the stand, 15, 20 feet off the ground. I was frozen, absolutely frozen, rifle still in my hands but forgotten. Safety off, finger nowhere near the trigger. My breath hitched in my throat. All thoughts of deer, of hunting, of anything normal just gone, replaced by pure, unadulterated fear. And something else, something like awe, like witnessing something you shouldn't, something that shouldn't exist, but there it was, right in front of you. She reached the edge of the pond. The fog was a bit thinner there, closer to the water. I could see clearer now. The creature in her arms shifted, moved a bit, and I got a glimpse of it. Just a fleeting glimpse, but enough to burn it into my memory forever. It wasn't human, not even close. It was furry, dark fur, and small, much smaller than I initially thought. Like a pup, but not a dog pup. More like, I hate to say it, but the closest thing I can compare it to, and this is going to sound even crazier, was like a goblin. Yeah, a goblin. From fairy tales. Pointed ears, kind of wrinkled face, little black eyes that seemed to glint even in the dim light. Just a quick look, but that image, man, that image is seared into my brain. The woman, the giant woman, reached down to the pond. She dipped her hand into the water, cupping it. Then she brought her hand up to the creature in her arms. Slowly, gently, she offered it the water, like a mother feeding a baby. The creature nuzzled into her hand, lapped at the water. She made that humming sound again, softer now, almost like a lullaby. It was surreal. Absolutely, completely surreal, standing there high in my deer stand, watching this giant, almost human woman gently giving water to this goblin-like baby in the middle of the Ohio woods, in the freezing fog. It felt like a dream, a nightmare. I wanted to run. God, I wanted to just climb down from that stand and bolt. But I couldn't move, paralyzed, partly by fear, partly by fascination. I couldn't tear my eyes away. It was like watching a train wreck in slow motion, but beautiful, in a twisted, horrifying way. She finished giving the creature water. It nestled back into her arms, snuggling against her chest. She straightened up, looked around, and for a split second I thought she looked right at me, up at my stand. Her eyes. I couldn't really see the color, not clearly through the fog and distance, but they were dark, deep, dark eyes, and they seemed to pierce, like they could see right through the fog, right through the trees, right through me. I held my breath, completely still, convinced she'd seen me, that she knew I was there watching her, but then she just turned, slowly, deliberately, turned away from the pond, turned back towards the deeper woods, and she started to walk, back the way she'd come, deeper and deeper into the trees. The humming faded a little as she moved further away, but it was still there, lingering in the air. She walked and walked, disappearing back into the fog, swallowed by the grey mist and the trees. And as she went, the hum got fainter and fainter until finally it was gone. Silence. Just the woods silence again, thick, heavy, empty. She was gone. Just like that. She appeared, she interacted with her baby, and then she vanished. Back into the woods, leaving me alone in the stand, shaking like a leaf. I stayed there for, I don't know how long. Must have been an hour, maybe more. Just staring in the direction she'd disappeared. Waiting for something, anything. For her to come back, for someone else to show up, for the fog to lift, for reality to snap back into place. But nothing happened. The fog stayed. The silence stayed. The woods stayed. Just normal woods. Or as normal as they could seem after what I'd just witnessed. Finally, my legs started to cramp. My teeth started to chatter. The cold was getting to me, now that the shock was wearing off. I slowly, carefully, climbed down from the stand. My legs were weak, shaky. I almost stumbled getting to the ground. I looked around, at the pond, at the woods. Everything looked ordinary. No sign of her, no sign of anything unusual. Just trees, fog, pond, leaves, like it had all been a hallucination, like I'd imagined the whole damn thing. I walked back to my truck, every nerve in my body still buzzing. My hands were trembling so bad I almost dropped my keys, started the engine, heater blasting, but I was still cold, bone cold, inside and out. Drove home in a daze. Didn't see a single deer the whole way, not even a squirrel. The woods felt different now, wrong, like something had shifted, something had broken in the fabric of reality out there. I didn't tell Sarah, didn't tell anyone, just acted like it was a normal hunting trip. Came home empty-handed, said I hadn't seen anything. She didn't press. But I knew. I knew what I'd seen. Or what I thought I'd seen. For years, I second-guessed myself. Maybe it was the cold, maybe the fog, maybe I'd just been too long in the woods, alone. Maybe my mind had played tricks on me, hallucination, stress, something. But deep down, I know it wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. It felt too real, too solid. The humming, the feeling, the sheer presence of her. It was too real. And I never went back to that spot, never hunted in those woods again. Too spooked, too unnerved. Just the thought of that place, the memory of that fog, that humming, that giant woman and her baby. It still makes my skin crawl. I still hunt, out in other areas, different woods. But I always listen a little closer now. I always scan the fog a little harder. And every time I hear a strange sound in the woods, especially a low hum, My heart skips a beat, because what if it's not bees this time? What if it's her? What if she's still out there? And what the hell was she? And what was that thing she was carrying? I have no idea, no earthly idea, and I probably never will. It just happened. That one morning, and then gone, leaving me with this story. This thing that I can't explain, can't forget, can't make sense of. Just this and the woods and the fog and the humming, that damn humming. Story 9. Okay, so I guess I should just get right into it. It happened a while back now, April of 2016. Feels like it was yesterday sometimes. Other times it feels like some crazy dream, but I know it wasn't. I was working road maintenance back then for the Island Highway crew, you know, filling potholes, clearing ditches, the usual grind. This was up island, way up, past Campbell River, out in the sticks. Highway 4 towards Tofino, but not even that far yet, just past that Crow Creek Bridge. Anyone who's driven it knows that stretch. Windy as hell, barely 2 lanes in places. And the trees, man, they're right up on the road, thick and dark, even in the daytime. That morning, it was just miserable. Classic West Coast spring rain. Not a downpour exactly, but that persistent, soaking rain, the kind that just gets into everything. Low cloud, the whole sky was this solid, heavy grey blanket. Made it darker than it should have been for morning. I'd been up since crack of dawn, grabbing a coffee and hitting the road in the work truck, one of the old F-150s. Wasn't looking forward to the day, honestly. Rain always made everything 10 times harder, and something about that morning just felt off, you know. Kind of heavy and still, like the air was thick with something, but I couldn't put my finger on it. Probably just the weather getting to me. I was heading west on 4, not quite to the bridge yet, just coming around this blind corner. It's one of those corners where you really gotta slow down, even if you know the road like the back of your hand. The trees close in on both sides and it kinks left, then sharp right. Visibility is 0 until you're right in the middle of it. And that's exactly where it was. Just coming out of the left turn, rounding into the right, and bam! Right in front of my headlights, in the middle of the freaking highway, this thing. I almost slammed on the brakes, which would have been stupid on that wet road, probably would have spun out and ended up in the ditch myself. But my foot was definitely hovering, let me tell you. It wasn't a deer, wasn't a bear, wasn't anything I'd ever seen in my life. This thing bolted across the road in front of me. It was so fast, it was unreal, like a freaking flash. One moment, empty road, next moment, this shape moving. And it was huge. I mean, seriously huge. It came from the left ditch, or what passes for a ditch on that road, just kind of a slope down into the woods, and it launched itself across the highway. Not running, not bounding, but a single, massive leap. Like something you see in a nature documentary when a cougar jumps onto a cliff face, but bigger. Way bigger. It cleared the whole width of the road, both lanes, and landed on the other side in the ditch on the right. And when I say ditch again, it's just another drop-off into trees. But it landed smooth, no stumble, nothing. Just thump and gone. Into the trees. For a split second, I just froze. My brain didn't even register what I was seeing. It was like my eyes saw it, but my brain was saying, nope, that didn't happen. But it did. I saw it. Clear as day, even in that crappy light. I slowed the truck down to a crawl, creeping forward, just to get a better look at where it went. Heart hammering in my chest. Adrenaline dump for sure. Pulled forward slowly, past the corner, and stopped as soon as I could see the edge of the woods on the right side of the road. No shoulder to speak of there, just gravel, and then straight into the trees. I put the truck in park, kept it running though, just in case I needed to get the hell out of there fast. And that's when I saw it. Or him, I don't even know what to call it. It was standing at the edge of the trees, just inside the woodline, maybe 10-15 feet back from the asphalt. Just standing there, stock still, facing away from the road, deeper into the woods. It was huge. I already said that, I know, but I don't think I can emphasize it enough. This thing made a bear look like a dog. It was easily 8 feet tall, maybe taller. Shoulders. I'm a big guy, I work manual labor. I know what broad shoulders look like. This thing's shoulders had to be 4 feet across, easy, massive. Just a solid wall of muscle and hair, fur, something. It was covered in hair, long hair, shaggy, thick hair. And the color was weird. It wasn't just one color. It was like a mix, a blend of reddish-brown, like rusted metal almost, and black. Dark, but with these streaks and patches of reddish-brown running through it. Kind of matted looking, from the rain, I guess. It was just standing there, completely motionless. Back to me. I couldn't see its face or anything, just this enormous, hairy back. The way it stood, upright for sure, like a person, but not quite. Broader, thicker, somehow. More solid. More powerful looking. I stared at it. Just stared. Couldn't take my eyes off it. Fear mixed with, I don't know, morbid curiosity. Like when you see something messed up on the highway and you know you shouldn't look, but you can't help it. Except this was 1,000 times worse, 1,000 times weirder. I wanted to get a better look, obviously, but there was nowhere to pull over safely. The road just curved away right there, and there was no shoulder, no visibility around the next bend. If a logging truck came barreling around, I'd be screwed. And honestly, a big part of me didn't want to get closer anyway. Something about it just radiated wrongness. Like I was looking at something that shouldn't be, something unnatural. I put the truck in drive again, slowly, just inching forward, hoping to maybe get a glimpse of its side, maybe see its face. But it didn't move, not a muscle. Just stayed standing there like a statue, a giant hairy statue. The road curved again and the trees closed in tighter on the right side, blocking my view. And just like that, it was gone. Out of sight. I kept driving, but slower now. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. My heart was still pounding. I kept looking in my rearview mirror, expecting, I don't know what. For it to be chasing me, to jump back out onto the road. I didn't know, just felt exposed. Like I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to see, and now what? I drove onto the Crow Creek Bridge, feeling like I was going to throw up. Parked on the other side, in the little pullout they have there for the trailhead. Turned off the truck and just sat there, engine ticking, listening to the rain, trying to get my head around what I'd just witnessed. What the hell was that thing? Seriously, was it some kind of bear? No way. Bears aren't that tall. Bears don't jump across highways like it's nothing. Bears don't stand like that. Upright, like a man, but different. And the hair, that weird mix of colors, reddish and black. I'd never seen anything like it. I thought about Sasquatch, Bigfoot. I know, sounds crazy, right? I never believed in that stuff. Always thought it was just stories, campfire tales. But what else could it be? There's nothing in this part of the world that looks anything like that. Nothing even remotely close. And Vancouver Island. It's wild, man. Huge tracts of untouched forest, mountains, everything. Plenty of places for something different to hide, to live unseen, out of sight, out of mind. I sat there for a long time just staring out at the rain, thinking, trying to rationalize it, to explain it away. Maybe it was a trick of the light. Maybe I was still half asleep when it happened. Maybe I imagined it, but I know I didn't. I saw it. Felt the jolt of fear go right through me, smelled the damp forest air, heard the rain on the truck roof, and saw that thing, standing there, massive, unreal. I eventually got myself together, figured I had to get back to work. Couldn't just sit there all day freaking out about a hairy thing. Got back in the truck, finished my route. Tried to put it out of my mind, but I couldn't. Every corner I rounded that day, every shadow in the trees, I was jumpy. Expecting to see it again, waiting for something to jump out. That night, back at the crew camp, I was talking to Arthur. He's a good guy, been working with him for years, pretty down to earth. Not someone you'd think would believe in fairy tales. but I had to tell someone, couldn't keep it bottled up. I waited until we were alone, after dinner, in the bunkhouse. Kept it casual at first, just mentioned seeing something weird on the road that morning. He was messing with his guitar, tuning it, but he looked up when I said weird. Weird how? He asked. I hesitated. Didn't want to sound like a lunatic, but I took a deep breath and just told him. Everything. From start to finish. The rain, the corner, the thing jumping across the road, the size of it, the hair, everything. He stopped tuning his guitar and just listened. Didn't interrupt, didn't laugh, just listened. And when I was done, he just stared at me for a minute. "Miles," he said finally, "you're serious?" "Yeah, Art, I'm serious. Dead serious. I swear to God I saw it. I know what I saw." He thought for another minute. Then he sighed. "Damn," he said. "Damn, Miles." He shook his head slowly. "You know, you're not the first person I've heard stories from. Not about that exactly. But weird stuff out in the bush, especially up island." He told me a story his uncle told him years ago about seeing something similar, way back in the logging days, in the same general area. Bigger than a man, hairy, fast. His uncle swore it was a Sasquatch. Arthur always thought he was full of it. Until now. Maybe there is something out there, he said, looking thoughtful. Maybe we just don't know everything that's out there, especially in places like this. We talked about it for a while longer that night, about Sasquatch, about unknown creatures, about the vastness of the wilderness. Arthur didn't dismiss me, didn't call me crazy. He seemed concerned, believed me, I think, or at least he believed I believed it. I asked him not to tell anyone else. I knew what people would say. "Miles saw Bigfoot? Yeah, right." Laughed me right out of the crew camp, so he kept his word. Just him and me knew, until now, I guess. And that's it. That's what happened. I went back to work the next day, and the day after that. Kept driving that stretch of highway hundreds of times since then. Never saw it again. Never saw anything remotely like it. But I haven't forgotten it. Not for a single day. I still drive Highway 4 sometimes. Still go past that corner, that spot. And every time my stomach clenches a little. I slow down, look into the trees, wonder if it's still there, watching, waiting. I don't know what it was. Don't have an explanation. Maybe it was Bigfoot. Maybe it was something else. Something we don't even have a name for. Something that just exists. Out there in the dark woods, hidden away from the world. And I saw it. Just for a few seconds. But those seconds, they changed something in me. Changed the way I look at the woods, at the wilderness, at the world. Made me realize that there's a lot more out there than we think we know. A lot more mystery, a lot more fear. And sometimes when I'm driving alone at night, on those dark roads, and the trees are closing in, and the rain is coming down, I still get that feeling, that cold prickle on the back of my neck, like something is watching, like I'm being watched, from the shadows, by something big and hairy and unknown, and I just keep driving, trying not to think about it, trying to forget, but I can't, and I won't, not ever. That image, that feeling, it's burned in my mind forever. And I know deep down that whatever I saw that day, it was real, terrifyingly real. And I have no idea what it was. And honestly, I don't think I want to know. Some questions are better left unanswered. Some doors are better left closed, and some things are better left in the dark, out in the wild, where they belong, and where hopefully they'll stay. Story 10. It was hot, like ridiculously hot, in the sauna. You know, the kind of heat that just soaks into your bones and makes you feel like you're sweating from the inside out. It was late summer, maybe early fall of 75. I was probably about 19, home from college for a bit. We had this traditional Finnish sauna out back on our farm in northern Minnesota, near Duluth. My grandpa built it way back, and we'd keep the tradition going, especially on weekends. It was supposed to be relaxing, you know, a way to sweat out all the stress. So there I was, baking myself in the dry heat, birch logs crackling in the stove, the smell of the cedar walls thick in the air. After maybe 20 minutes, I figured I was cooked enough. Stepped outside, naked as the day I was born, to cool down a bit in the twilight air. The sun was setting, painting the sky in these faded orange and purple streaks. Really beautiful. Usually it's just quiet out there, peaceful, farm quiet. You hear the crickets, maybe the wind in the trees, distant cows lowing, that kind of thing. But this night, it felt different. I sat down on the wooden bench we had just outside the sauna door, needed to catch my breath, let the sweat evaporate. The air was cool on my skin, a welcome relief after that intense heat. I closed my eyes for a second, enjoying the feeling, just letting my head clear. And that's when I got this prickling sensation. Like when you know someone is staring at you, even if you can't see them. It was that kind of feeling, but amplified, way stronger, almost physical. Like the air itself was heavy, and something was watching me from it. I opened my eyes, slowly at first, just looking straight ahead, at the woods behind the sauna. Nothing, just trees, darkening shadows as night really started to creep in. I told myself it was just my imagination, the heat messing with my head. Tried to shake it off, but the feeling stayed, insistent like a buzzing fly you can't swat away. Then I slowly turned my head to the left, towards the side of the sauna. That's when I saw it. Just over the edge of the sauna roof, maybe about 6.5 feet up from the ground, was something. Just the head and shoulders of it. It was dark, impossibly dark against the fading light. At first, honestly, my brain fumbled, tried to make sense of it. In that split second, I thought maybe it was my brother Mark. He's taller than me, a bit goofy. Maybe he was pulling a prank or something. But even as that thought flashed, I knew it was wrong. Terribly wrong. I said his name anyway, stupidly, automatically. Mark? My voice came out raspy, shaky, and that's when I saw it clearly. It wasn't Mark. It wasn't human. It was dark, covered in hair. Thick, matted-looking dark hair, like an animal, but not like any animal I'd ever seen. The face was hard to describe, because it was mostly shadow. But the shape was wrong. Broader, flatter, with eyes that reflected something. I couldn't make out pupils or irises, just 2 points of light in the gloom, reflecting the last of the twilight, maybe. They seemed to glow faintly, and it was huge. The head and shoulders alone were massive, towering over the sauna roof. If it was standing fully, I couldn't even guess how tall it would be. 8 feet, 9, taller. The fear hit me then, not just being startled, but real animal terror. The kind that slams into your chest and steals your breath. My heart hammered against my ribs like it was trying to break free. My mouth went dry. I just stared at it, frozen, completely paralyzed. My mind raced, trying to categorize what I was seeing, to fit it into some kind of box. Bear, but no bear was that tall. And the face, no, not a bear. Monkey? We were in Minnesota, not some jungle. This was farmland, for God's sake. Cows, pigs, deer, sure. Not this. This was wrong, fundamentally wrong, like something out of a nightmare, but right there, solid and real. The creature, thing, just stayed there, hovering over the edge of the sauna roof. It didn't move, didn't make a sound. Just those eyes fixed on me, those points of light in the darkness. I couldn't even tell if it was breathing. It was just there, imposing, silent, utterly terrifying. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it was gone. It didn't jump down or climb down or run around the corner. It just vanished. 1 second it was there, filling my vision with its monstrous form, and the next it wasn't, like it had stepped behind the sauna and just disappeared into thin air. But I didn't hear it move. No rustling of leaves, no snapping of twigs, no heavy footfalls, nothing, just gone. The silence that followed was almost worse than seeing it. The crickets seemed to have gone quiet. The wind had stopped. Everything just held its breath. Terror finally jolted me into action. I didn't stop to think, didn't question what I'd just seen. Instinct took over, survival instinct, pure and simple. I scrambled back into the sauna, into the little changing room. My hands fumbled with my clothes, clumsy with fear. I pulled on my jeans inside out, didn't care, just needed to get dressed, needed to get out of there. My shirt, my boots. Everything felt like it was taking forever. All the while I could feel its eyes on me. Even though it was gone, behind the sauna, I felt watched. Like it was still out there, just on the other side of the wooden walls, waiting, listening. I practically ripped the sauna door open and bolted, ran. Barefoot, still sweating from the sauna, I just ran. Across the yard towards the farmhouse as fast as my legs could carry me. My lungs burned, my side ached, but I didn't stop, didn't look back. Just ran, fueled by pure, unadulterated fear. Burst through the back door of the farmhouse like a madman. My parents were in the kitchen. My younger brother Billy was there too, doing homework at the table. They all stopped and stared as I came crashing in, gasping for breath, my face probably white as a sheet. "Toby, what in God's name?" my dad started, his voice sharp with concern. I couldn't even talk at first, just stood there, chest heaving, pointing back towards the sauna, towards the woods. "Out. Sauna. Thing," I stammered, words tripping over each other. They rushed over, grabbing me, pulling me further into the kitchen, asking what happened. Slowly, as the initial shock started to wear off, the words started to come. I told them what I'd seen, about the sauna, the feeling of being watched, the creature, the size, the hair, the eyes, how it disappeared. Everything just pouring out of me in a rush of jumbled sentences. My dad listened, his face getting grimmer with each word. My mom looked pale, her hand flying to her mouth. Billy just stared at me, eyes wide, probably thinking I'd finally lost my mind. When I finished, there was a silence in the kitchen, a heavy, uneasy silence. My dad finally broke it. He didn't dismiss it, didn't tell me I was seeing things, or that it was a bear or something. He just nodded slowly. "Okay," he said, his voice low and serious. "Okay, Toby, let's go take a look." He went to the gun cabinet in the living room and took out his shotgun. My older brother Tom appeared from the living room, drawn by the commotion. Dad quickly explained what was going on. Tom's eyes narrowed, and he went to get his rifle from his room. Even Billy, who was usually a scaredy cat, seemed galvanized by the seriousness of the situation and grabbed the baseball bat from by the door. Armed, we went back out into the yard. It was properly dark now, the last sliver of sunset completely gone. The air felt different now, charged, tense. Even walking across the yard towards the sauna, I felt that same prickling sensation again, that feeling of being watched but multiplied. We approached the sauna slowly, cautiously. Dad and Tom leading, guns ready, Billy trailing behind with the bat, me bringing up the rear, my heart pounding again in my chest. We surrounded the sauna, checking every side, shining flashlights into the woods around it. Nothing, absolutely nothing. No sign of anything unusual. Just the sauna, sitting there in the darkness, looking perfectly ordinary. We checked all around the perimeter. We went into the woods behind it, shone our lights between the trees, walked further in than we usually would. Nothing. There was just one thing. Right next to the sauna, in the grass, there were patches of flattened grass, like something heavy had been standing there. Big patches, irregularly shaped, as if something very large and not very human-shaped had been pacing or standing still. That was it. No tracks, no fur, no broken branches, no smell, nothing else. Just those flattened patches of grass and the unsettling feeling that hung in the air. We searched for a long time, well into the night. My dad and Tom were methodical, serious, checking for anything, any clue. They even tracked a little ways into the woods, but lost any sign in the undergrowth. Eventually, we had to give up. There was just nothing there. We went back to the farmhouse, locking all the doors and windows. The atmosphere in the house was thick with unease. Nobody said much. My mum made us hot chocolate, which felt weirdly normal in the middle of all this strangeness. We all went to bed eventually, but I don't think anyone slept well that night. I know I didn't. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside my window, I was on edge, expecting to see those glowing eyes peering in. The next day, everything felt surreal, like the whole thing had been a nightmare. The sun was shining, birds were singing, cows were lowing in the fields. Everything was normal, farm life normal, except underneath it all there was this undercurrent of unease, of something different. We went back out to the sauna during daylight, examined it again, the surrounding area. Still nothing. The flattened grass was still there, but it could have been anything, really. Wind, deer, whatever. There was no proof of anything, except what I knew I'd seen. I told myself maybe it was just my imagination, heat stroke, something like that. But deep down I knew it wasn't. I saw what I saw, and it terrified me. Later that week, talking with some guys in town, just casual chat, somehow the subject drifted to strange things around here. Old-timers telling stories, you know how it goes. And then someone mentioned the school bus. Apparently kids on the school bus route that went way out into the rural areas, the same area our farm was in, had been talking, whispering stories about seeing something on the roads late in the afternoon as the bus was doing its evening rounds. Something tall, dark, hairy, standing by the side of the road, near the woods, just watching. Kids were scared. The older kids mostly brushed it off, calling it tall tales, but some of the younger ones were genuinely spooked. The bus driver, they said, had even mentioned seeing something himself once, in his rear-view mirror, in the fading light. But he'd just shrugged it off, blamed it on shadows and tiredness. But hearing those stories, it hit me like a punch in the gut. It wasn't just me. Other people had seen something similar maybe, out there in the woods, in the twilight. I never saw it again. We kept using the sauna, though maybe not as late in the evening. We were all a little more aware, I guess, when we were outside after dark, always looking over our shoulders, and to this day I can't explain it. What I saw that night by the sauna, it wasn't a bear, it wasn't a deer, it wasn't a person. It was something else, something wrong. Something that shouldn't be. And I'm left with this feeling, this cold knot in my stomach, wondering what it was. Wondering what else is out there, lurking in the shadows, in the deep woods, in the places we think are safe and familiar. Sometimes, when I'm outside at dusk, even now, decades later, I still get that prickling feeling on the back of my neck. And I look up at the edge of the trees, at the darkening sky, and I remember those glowing eyes and that immense dark shape towering over the sauna roof. And I feel that fear again, as cold and sharp as the Minnesota winter air. I still have no explanation, and honestly, I don't think I ever will. Story 11. Okay, so I don't even know where to start with this. It still messes with my head after all these years. I guess I should just tell it how it happened. It was back in the 70s, maybe 78, 79, somewhere around there. I was pretty young, maybe 10 or 11. My parents had split up a while before, and my dad, he'd moved way out to Alberta. Not like Calgary or Edmonton, but proper out there, near Fort Assiniboine. Middle of nowhere, pretty much. He'd always dreamed of living in the woods, away from everything. So he bought this place, this log house thing, on a hill overlooking the river. It was supposed to be his dream home, and for him, maybe it was. For me, it was just isolated. He wanted me to come visit for a weekend in the fall. Fall in Alberta is cold, man, like bone-chilling cold even back then, especially out in the woods. I remember the drive being long, hours of just trees and more trees after we got off the highway. No towns, barely any other cars. When we finally pulled up to his place, it was impressive, I guess, in a scary kind of way. The house itself was nice, big windows looking out over this huge valley and the river snaking through it. But it was so quiet, like really quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring. Just the wind in the trees and the occasional bird call. My dad seemed happy though, showing me around, talking about how he'd seen deer in the yard and even bear tracks. Bear tracks. That detail sticks with me now, looking back. The house was kind of weird inside too. It was open plan, he called it. Living room, dining area, kitchen, all one big space with these massive windows on one whole wall. Upstairs was this open balcony thing overlooking the living room. That's where his bedroom was. And then down the hall, my room. Everything was wood, log walls, wooden floors, wooden furniture. Smelled like pine and something else, something damp maybe, like old wood and leaves. It was already getting dark when we arrived, even though it wasn't that late. Because of the trees, they blocked out a lot of light. My dad started a fire in this big stone fireplace in the living room, and that helped warm things up a bit and made it feel a little less creepy. But still, we had dinner. Just something simple he'd made ahead of time. He was never much of a cook. We talked. Not much, really. He mostly talked about how much he loved living out there, how peaceful it was, how he could finally relax. I was just trying to be polite, but inside I was getting more and more uneasy. It felt like we were the only two people in the whole world. After dinner, we sat by the fire for a while. He put on some music, some old country stuff I didn't know, but it was low, just background noise. I was tired from the drive and the weirdness of it all. I told him I was going to go to bed. He said goodnight, told me to sleep well, and that was it. My room was small, with a bed, a dresser, and a tiny window looking out the side of the house. It was pitch black outside. No streetlights, no city glow, nothing. Just black. I could hear the wind picking up outside, rustling the leaves and branches against the house. I got into bed, pulled the covers up to my chin, and just stared at the ceiling. I couldn't really sleep. Every little creak of the house made me jump. It's an old log house, so it creaked a lot. But these weren't normal creaks. Or maybe they were, and I was just freaked out being in the middle of nowhere. Time went by. I don't know how long. Maybe a couple of hours. I was just lying there, trying to calm down, trying to ignore all the sounds. Then it happened. It started subtly at first. A sound outside, different from the wind. Like a thump, a heavy thump. Then another one, closer this time. And then branches snapping, like something big was moving around outside, just beyond the windows. I froze. My heart started pounding in my chest. Thump, 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 way too fast. The thumping got louder, heavier, like something was walking around the house. Pacing. I sat up in bed, listening, straining my ears. Then I heard it. The banging, bang, bang, bang. Loud, violent bangs. Like someone was pounding on the front of the house with a sledgehammer. It was coming from the living room, from the direction of those big windows. My blood turned to ice. I was terrified. Completely and utterly terrified. I didn't move at first. I just sat there, huddled under the covers, shaking. Bang! 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 It kept going, louder and louder, and then the rustling of trees got more intense too. Like whatever was making those bangs was also pushing against the trees, shaking them. The whole house felt like it was vibrating. I finally got out of bed, my legs shaky as jelly. I tiptoed to the door of my room, opened it a crack, and peeked out. The house was dark, except for the faint glow of embers from the fireplace downstairs. Everything was silent for a moment, except for my own ragged breathing. I could hear the wind outside again, just the wind now, and the normal creaks of the house. Had it stopped? Was it over? Maybe it was just a tree branch falling on the house, I tried to tell myself. But the bangs had been so loud, so forceful, it didn't sound like a tree branch. Then it started again. Bang! But this time it wasn't just bangs. There was also this tearing sound, like wood splintering. Bang! Tear! Crack! It was definitely coming from the living room, from the front of the house where all the windows were. My dad's room was up those open stairs, right above the living room. Was he awake? Did he hear it? I had to see. I crept out of my room and towards the balcony. I could see down into the living room from there. It was dark, really dark, but I could make out shapes, the outline of the fireplace, the furniture, and the windows. I could see the windows, and something was definitely out there, something big. I could see a shadow against the windows, a huge shadow, blocking out what little light there was from the night sky. It was hunched over, like it was leaning against the house. And then I heard the scratching, long dragging scratches against the glass, like fingernails, giant fingernails. I was rooted to the spot, frozen in terror. I wanted to scream, to run back to my room, to hide under the bed, but I couldn't move. I just stood there on the balcony, staring down at that shadow against the windows, listening to those horrible sounds, the banging, the tearing, the scratching. Then suddenly lights flicked on downstairs, bright, harsh living room lights. My dad, he must have woken up too. He must have heard it. I saw him come out of his room on the balcony across from me, rubbing his eyes, looking around, confused. He looked down into the living room, and then he saw it. As soon as the lights came on, whatever was out there, it stood up. And it wasn't a shadow anymore. It was something. Something solid, something huge. It was right there on the deck outside the windows, just feet away from us, towering over the railings. It was tall, so tall, taller than any man, taller than I could even imagine. It was covered in fur, dark, matted fur, and it was shaped wrong. It was sort of like a man standing upright, but different, broader, thicker, with these huge sloping shoulders. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, and its head, I couldn't see its face clearly. It was kind of turned away, but I could see the shape of its head, pointed, not like a person, not like a bear, something else. It was just standing there for a moment, silhouetted against the windows, huge and dark and watching. Then my dad yelled. He shouted something, I don't even remember what, just a roar of panic and anger. He ran back into his room, and I heard him rummaging around. I knew what he was doing. He was getting his gun. He had a shotgun for protection. He'd told me about it. For bears, he'd said. He came running back out onto the balcony, holding the shotgun. He pointed it at the windows, at that thing. He yelled again, louder this time, "Get out of here! Get away from my house!" His voice was shaking, but he was trying to be brave, trying to protect us. I was still frozen, watching everything from the other side of the balcony. I wanted to scream at him to be careful, to run, but I couldn't make a sound. My throat was tight with fear. The creature didn't move. It just stood there looking at us, looking right at us. I could feel its eyes, even though I couldn't see its face properly. It was like it was staring right through us. Then it tilted its head, just slightly, like it was curious, or assessing us. My dad raised the shotgun. He was going to shoot. I closed my eyes, bracing for the sound, for the recoil, for I don't know what, but the shot never came. Instead, there was a blur of movement, so fast, faster than anything I'd ever seen. One moment, the creature was on the deck, right in front of the windows. The next, it was gone, just vanished. It didn't run, it didn't stumble, it didn't even seem to jump. It was just there and then not there, like it had teleported or dissolved into the darkness. My dad stood there, frozen, the shotgun still pointed at the empty deck. He was panting, his face pale. He lowered the gun slowly, still staring at the windows. He walked slowly to the edge of the balcony and peered over the railing, down towards the ground outside. Nothing, just trees, shadows, the wind. He turned around, his eyes wide and wild. He looked at me, finally seeing me standing there on the other side of the balcony. He just mumbled one word, barely a whisper. Sasquatch. That was it. He just stood there, staring, muttering Sasquatch over and over again. He didn't fire the gun, he didn't chase after it, he didn't do anything. He just accepted it. Like he knew somehow what it was. Like he'd always suspected something like this was out there. We stayed up the rest of the night, sitting by the fire, neither of us saying much. He kept checking the windows, peering out into the darkness. He loaded the shotgun and put it by his side. I just sat there, wrapped in a blanket, shaking, trying to understand what I'd just seen, trying to make sense of it. But there was no sense to be made. It was impossible. It couldn't have been real, but it was. I know what I saw. We both did. The next morning, everything looked normal. The sun was out, the birds were singing, the woods looked peaceful and beautiful. Too normal. It was like the night before had been a dream, a nightmare. But the splintered wood on the deck railing, that was real. We went outside to look. There were huge scratches on the wooden deck, deep gouges in the railings, and footprints in the soft earth around the house. Not bear prints, not human prints, something else, something big, something different. We left later that day. I was desperate to get out of there, to go home, back to normal life. My dad didn't say much about it on the drive back. He was quiet, thoughtful. I think he was scared too, but also almost thrilled, like he'd finally seen something he'd always believed in. I never went back to that house. I never wanted to, and we never really talked about it again, not properly. He'd just sometimes mention those woods or things out there. He moved back to the city a few years later, said the isolation was getting to him, but I always knew deep down that it wasn't just the isolation. It was what we saw that night. To this day, I don't know what it was. I try to rationalize it. Maybe it was a bear standing on its hind legs. But it didn't look like a bear. It moved too fast. And the way my dad said Sasquatch, like he knew exactly what he was talking about, like he'd been waiting for it. I try not to think about it too much. It's been years. But sometimes, late at night when it's quiet and dark, I remember those bangs, those scratches, that shadow against the window, those eyes, and I get chills all over again. I know what I saw, and I know it wasn't just a dream, and that's the scariest part. There are things out there that we can't explain, things that are real, even when they shouldn't be. And that night in Fort Assiniboine, that was one of them. I still can't explain what it was, and sometimes I wonder if maybe it was better that way, that we just saw it, and then it was gone. I'm glad my dad didn't shoot. I don't even want to think about what might have happened if he had. But that silence after it vanished, the feeling of something unknown, powerful and close, that feeling still sticks with me, and I don't think it'll ever really go away. Story 12. It's still hard to talk about, even now, all these years later. I'm not someone who scares easily, grew up in the country, always outside, always in the woods. You think you know the land, you know what's out there, you get comfortable. And then something like this happens, and it just rewrites everything. It messes you up for real. This was back when I was maybe 14, winter in Texas, out in Chestnut Ridge Ranch, my granddad's place. Huge place, thousands of acres. We'd go out there hunting every year, deer mostly. I was already pretty experienced for my age. Granddad had been taking me out since I was tiny, teaching me everything. I knew how to track, how to handle a rifle, how to just be quiet and listen to the woods. This particular day, it was cold, biting cold. That Texas winter chill that gets right into your bones, you know? Grey sky, ground was hard and a bit frosty, perfect for hunting. I was heading to one of our old tree stands, way back in the woods, near Big Sandy Creek. It was a good spot. Granddad had put it up years ago. Nobody really used it much anymore, which I liked. Felt like it was my own little secret place out there. I walked in, the woods were quiet. Just that winter hush, the sound of your own boots crunching on the leaves and twigs. The trees were bare, skeletal, reaching up into that grey sky. Even though I'd been through those woods a million times, there's always that little bit of something. You're out in the wild, alone. Anything could be out there, you know. But it was familiar fear, almost exciting, not what I felt later, not even close. Got to the tree stand, climbed up, got myself settled, had my rifle, a thermos of hot chocolate. Grandad always made sure I had hot chocolate. I scanned the woods, getting my bearings. Sun was still coming up, filtering through the branches, making these long, weird shadows on the ground. Normal wood sounds, birds chirping faintly in the distance, the wind rustling through the bare branches. And then I saw her, a doe, just appeared on the little ridge maybe 50 yards in front of me, totally silent. She was beautiful, just standing there in the half-light, all alert and graceful. Normally, seeing a doe would be whatever, not the target. But something about her was off right away. She wasn't grazing or anything. She was completely still, head up, ears twitching like crazy. Her eyes were wide, staring into the woods. Not at me, not at anything obvious, just into the deep shadows under the trees. And she was trembling. You could see it in her legs. Her whole body was tense. It wasn't like she was just cold. It was like she was terrified. Truly, genuinely scared. And that's when this really weird feeling hit me like prickles on the back of my neck. That instinct that something is wrong, something is really, really wrong. I've hunted enough to see deer nervous before. But this was different. This was primal fear pouring off of her. It was catching. I watched her, rifle still across my lap, just watching, trying to figure out what she was looking at. I scanned the woods, same as she was, trying to see if there was a coyote or a bobcat, something that might have spooked her. Nothing, just trees and shadows and underbrush. But the doe, she kept staring, and then she started making this soft, low sound. Not a snort, not a bleat, something else. Almost like a whimper, but deeper, like she was trying to warn something or someone. But it was just a warning, a pure, terrified warning sound. And then, in the shadows, right where she was looking, I saw it. Or, I saw something. It started as just darker shadow in the shadows. You know how it is in the woods. There are always darker spots, patches of deep shade. But this was different. It was like this darkness was forming, solidifying. At first, I thought it was maybe a cow. We had cattle on the ranch too, and sometimes they'd wander further than they were supposed to. In the low light, a black cow in the trees. Yeah, maybe. But even as the thought crossed my mind, I knew it wasn't right. Cows don't move like that. Cows don't feel like that. This shape was wrong. It was like it was pulling the darkness around it, like it was making the shadows deeper where it was. It wasn't moving fast, just sort of oozing forward, slow and deliberate, through the underbrush. No sound. Absolutely silent, except for the doe, still whimpering but now louder, more frantic. I raised my rifle slowly, sighted down the scope, trying to get a better look. The scope makes everything clearer, brings it closer. I could see the shape better now, still black, still shapeless mostly, but bulkier than a cow, lower to the ground too somehow, wider and uneven, like it wasn't supposed to be shaped that way. Through the scope I was trying to make sense of it, trying to force it into something normal, bare, too dark, too low, too weirdly shaped. Hog? Maybe, but again, the way it was moving, the way the doe was reacting, it didn't fit. It just felt deeply wrong. And then I saw the hand. It wasn't like a human hand, or even a bear paw. It was coming out of the side of the shape, like it was unfolding from the darkness. Long, too long, and skinny. Really skinny, but somehow strong-looking. Like bone and tendon stretched tight under black skin. Or, not skin, something else. And the fingers. They weren't fingers. They were too long, each one way too long, and they ended in claws. Black claws, thick, curved and sharp-looking, like obsidian, just sticking out from the end of these impossible fingers. I saw that hand, reaching out from the darkness, just hanging there for a second, and everything in my brain just short-circuited. Everything logical, everything normal just crashed. It wasn't a cow, it wasn't a hog, it wasn't anything I'd ever seen or imagined. It was something else, something that shouldn't be there, something deeply, profoundly wrong with the world. Fear, real, bone-deep, ice-cold terror. It grabbed me, squeezed me, paralyzed me. I was just staring through the scope at this thing. My heart was hammering in my chest, so loud I could hear it over the blood rushing in my ears. I couldn't breathe, couldn't move, just staring. The hand stayed there for maybe a couple of seconds, just hanging in the air, claws extended. And then it moved, slowly, deliberately. It reached out towards the doe, not like it was trying to grab her, more like it was feeling the air, exploring, like it was curious, but in a way that was terrifying. The doe went absolutely ballistic. She bolted, jumped straight up in the air and then took off, crashing through the underbrush, disappearing in a flash of white tail. Gone. And the shape, the thing, it just watched her go. The hand lowered slowly. The whole shape seemed to deflate a little, like it had lost interest. And then it just vanished. 1 second it was there, this black, undefined, monstrous shape with the clawed hand, and the next it was gone, just gone, like it had dissolved back into the shadows, like it had never been there at all, except I knew it had. I had seen it. I had seen that hand. I lowered my rifle, shaking. My hands were numb, my legs were trembling so bad I thought I was going to fall out of the tree stand. I just sat there for a long time. I don't know how long, staring at the spot where it had been, where the doe had been. Nothing, just empty woods, just normal trees and shadows. But it wasn't normal. It was all wrong. Everything felt wrong. The silence of the woods now felt heavy, oppressive. The shadows felt deeper, more watchful. I felt like I was still being watched, even though there was nothing there. I couldn't stay there anymore. I couldn't breathe right. My chest was tight, like something was crushing it. I climbed down from the tree stand, fumbling with my rifle, almost dropping it. I just had to get out of there, get back to the house, get to Grandad. I started walking, then faster, then running. Just running, stumbling through the woods, back the way I'd come. I didn't care about being quiet anymore, didn't care about hunting. Just had to get away. Away from that place, away from that thing. I burst out of the trees and into the field, still running, towards the ranch house. I could see it in the distance, smoke coming from the chimney. Home, safety, or so I hoped. I ran into the house, slamming the door behind me. Grandad was in the kitchen at the table, reading the newspaper with his coffee. He looked up, surprised to see me, especially running like that. "Caleb? What in tarnation?" he started. Then he saw my face. I must have looked like I'd seen a ghost. Because I had. I couldn't even talk for a second, just stood there gasping for breath, chest heaving. Grandad got up, came over to me, put a hand on my shoulder. His hand was warm and solid. That helped a little. "Caleb, son, what is it? What happened?" His voice was calm, steady. Grandad was always calm, always steady. Even when things were bad, he was the rock. I finally got my breath back enough to talk. "Grandad, in the woods, back by Big Sandy Creek, I saw something." My voice was still shaky. He led me to a chair at the table, pushed me into it. "Sit down. Take a breath. Tell me slow. What did you see?" I told him. Everything. From the doe acting weird, to the shadowy shape, to the hand with the claws. I told him about the fear, how it felt, how it looked, everything I could remember. It came out in a rush, jumbled and broken, but I told him everything. He listened, just listened. He didn't interrupt, didn't say anything. He just sat there watching me, his face unreadable. Grandad was good at that, keeping his face still. You never really knew what he was thinking. But his eyes were intense, watching me, taking everything in. When I finished, when I'd told him everything, there was silence. A long, heavy silence in the kitchen. The only sound was the crackling of the fire in the stove, and my own breathing, still ragged. Grandad didn't say anything for a long time. He just looked at me. Then he got up, walked over to the window, looked out at the woods. The same woods where I'd just been, the woods that now felt tainted. "You sure it wasn't a bear?" he asked, finally, his voice quiet. "No, Grandad, it wasn't a bear. It wasn't anything normal." I said it as sure as I could be, even though it sounded crazy, even to me, saying it out loud. But I knew what I'd seen. I knew it wasn't normal. He turned back from the window, his face still hard to read. "All right," he said. "Just all right." And then he did something really strange. He went to the gun cabinet in the corner of the kitchen, unlocked it, and took out his rifle, his old hunting rifle, the one he'd had forever. He loaded it, checked the action very deliberately. He was always careful with guns, safety first, always. But this felt different. This wasn't just gun safety. This was something else. He looked at me, holding the rifle. "You stay here," he said. "Don't go outside, not for anything. You understand?" I nodded, scared. Scared by what I'd seen in the woods, but now also scared by Grandad's reaction. He wasn't the type to get spooked easily. He'd seen everything, done everything. He'd fought in wars. He'd faced down wild animals. He was tough as nails. And he was acting scared, or at least seriously concerned. He didn't say anything else, just walked out of the house with his rifle, out into the cold, grey afternoon, leaving me alone in the kitchen, with the fire crackling, and the silence, and the fear. I watched him from the window. He walked out into the field, towards the woods. He didn't run like I had. He walked slowly, deliberately, like he was going to meet something, or hunt something, something that wasn't a deer. He disappeared into the trees, and I was alone, just sitting there in the kitchen, listening to the house creak and groan in the wind, waiting, not knowing what to expect. What was Grandad going to do? What was out there in the woods? Was it still out there? Was it coming back? Hours went by. The afternoon turned to evening. The light faded. The kitchen got darker. I didn't move from the chair, just kept watching the window, watching the woods, waiting. Terror coiled tight in my gut. Finally, when it was almost completely dark, I heard the door open. Grandad came back in. He was carrying his rifle. His face was still unreadable, but he looked tired, grim. He put the rifle back in the cabinet, locked it. Then he turned to me. "All right," he said again, his voice low. "You all right?" I nodded. "Yeah. You see anything?" I had to ask, but I was almost afraid to know the answer. He didn't answer right away, just looked at me, his eyes old, older than they'd ever looked before. "We're gonna keep watch tonight," he said finally. "We'll both keep watch, just in case." "In case of what, Grandad?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He just shook his head. "Don't matter," he said. "Just, we're gonna keep watch." And we did. We stayed up all night, sitting in the living room, in the dark, with the lights off, looking out the windows at the woods. Grandad had his rifle with him. He sat in his armchair, still and silent, watching. I sat on the floor, wrapped in a blanket, shivering, watching with him. Nothing happened that night, just the darkness and the wind in the trees and the silence. But it was the most terrifying night of my life, because I knew, we both knew, that something was out there, something we didn't understand, something wrong. The sun came up, grey and cold, same as the day before. Grandad got up, made coffee, like nothing was wrong, like it was just another day on the ranch. But it wasn't. It wasn't ever going to be the same again. We never talked about it again, not really. Grandad never said what he'd seen, or if he'd seen anything at all in the woods that afternoon. He just closed it off, like it was something we weren't supposed to talk about, something we weren't supposed to know. But I know what I saw. I know what was out there in those woods, and I know I'll never forget it. Never stop feeling that cold dread when I think about it. The woods out at Chestnut Ridge, they're not the same anymore. They're not safe, not really. Something's out there, something unknown, and it's watching, still watching, and I have no idea what it is or what it wants, and that's the part that really messes with you, you know? The not knowing, the absolute terrifying unknown. Story 13. It's still something I can't really wrap my head around, even after all these years. October 7th, 1975. That date is just burned into my brain. Me and Gustavo, my buddy since we were kids, we decided to go deer hunting. Emerald Peaks, Arizona. Beautiful place, but way out in the boonies. Back then, even more remote than it is now, I guess. I was hyped, man, really wanting to bag a big one that year. Gustavo, he was always a bit more careful, I guess you could say. He was happy to go along, but he was already talking about how maybe we were biting off more than we could chew, going so deep out there. Morning air was crisp, you know, that cold, sharp smell of pine and damp earth. We parked the truck and geared up. We figured we'd split up to cover more ground. I told Gustavo I was going to head down into the deep canyon area. Seemed like prime deer territory. He said he'd stick closer to the base of the peaks, didn't want to get too far off the beaten path. That was Gustavo, always sensible. I started walking down this old logging road, overgrown in places but still pretty clear. Sun was just starting to peek over the mountains, throwing long shadows everywhere. The forest was quiet, just the crunch of my boots on the gravelly dirt and the occasional bird chirping. Peaceful, you know. Just the kind of morning you dream about for a hunting trip. But as I got further down the road, something started to feel off. The air got stiller, almost heavy. The bird sounds just stopped. Complete silence. It wasn't the good kind of quiet, the peaceful woods quiet. This was different, like empty. I kept walking, trying to shake off the weird feeling. Maybe it was just the shadows playing tricks, or maybe I was just getting a little spooked being alone so deep in the woods. But it didn't go away. It got stronger. The trees seemed to press in closer. The air felt colder, even though the sun was climbing higher. And then silence. Total, absolute silence, like the world just muted itself. No wind rustling the leaves, no bugs buzzing, nothing. Just nothing. It was the kind of silence that makes your ears ring, you know? That's when the hairs on the back of my neck really stood up. Something was wrong. Bad wrong. And then it happened. A scream. Not just any scream, but a blood-curdling shriek that ripped through the silence. It was high-pitched, sharp, and full of pure terror. Human scream. Instantly my heart jumped into my throat. I froze, rifle clutched in my hands, scanning the trees, trying to figure out where it came from. It had sounded like it came from further down in the canyon, maybe on the other side of the ridge. But before I could even process what I'd heard, the scream was cut off by something else. Something animalistic. A roar. Not like a lion. Not like anything I'd ever heard before. Deeper, guttural, almost like it came from the earth itself. And then another roar, answering the first one, closer this time, and then more screams. Not human screams this time, but agonizing, high-pitched cries like something in terrible pain. Animal cries. But huge, powerful animal cries. My mind was racing. Bears, mountain lions. But the roars, they didn't sound like any bear I'd ever heard. And the screams, there were multiple screams now, all mixed together with those monstrous roars, echoing through the canyon. It was chaos, a symphony of pure, raw terror. Fear clamped down on me like a vice. I didn't know what the hell was happening, but whatever it was tearing something apart down there. I started moving, slowly at first, trying to get to higher ground, trying to see what was going on across the ridge. I moved up the side of the logging road, pushing through bushes, scrambling over rocks, adrenaline pumping through me. I needed to see, I had to know. Was it Gustavo? That thought hit me like ice water. Was Gustavo down there? I finally reached a point on the ridge where I could see down into the deeper part of the canyon. Mist still hung low in some places, making it hard to see everything clearly, but I could see enough. And what I saw, it made my blood run cold. Movement. Big movement. On the opposite slope of the canyon, through the trees, something huge was crashing down the hillside, coming right for the canyon floor. It was brown and massive, and as it broke into a clearer patch, I saw it. A bear. A grizzly. A big one, bolting down the hill like it was being chased by demons. It was moving faster than I'd ever seen a bear move, clumsy but desperate, limbs flailing, roaring in panic. But it wasn't roaring aggressively. It was roaring in absolute sheer terror. I watched, stunned, as this massive grizzly bear tore across the canyon floor and disappeared into the thick undergrowth on the other side, still roaring in fear. What in God's name was chasing a grizzly bear? Grizzlies are the top predators around here. Nothing scares a grizzly, except what I'd heard earlier, those roars, those monstrous sounds. My legs felt like lead, but my mind was screaming at me to move, to understand. I started moving cautiously down the ridge, towards the area where I'd seen the bear coming from. I had to see what had scared it. I had to know what was down there. As I got closer, the smell hit me. Strong, metallic, acrid, the smell of blood. And something else, something rank, something animal but wrong. The forest floor became littered with broken branches, torn earth, signs of a struggle. It looked like a hurricane had ripped through there, and then I saw them. Deer, a lot of them, piled up together in a small clearing. 6 deer, mature bucks, all of them big, lying still, tangled together, limbs at awkward angles. At first, I thought maybe they'd been caught in a landslide or something, but then I got closer, and I saw what was wrong. They were headless, every single one of them, cleanly decapitated, no heads anywhere to be seen, just bodies. 6 massive deer piled up like cordwood, bodies still warm, blood still seeping into the forest floor, and no heads. It was butchery, but on a scale I couldn't even comprehend. This wasn't a mountain lion kill. Mountain lions take down deer, sure, but they don't decapitate 6 of them and leave them in a pile. And they definitely don't scare off grizzly bears in the process. My stomach churned, my breath caught in my throat. This wasn't natural, this wasn't normal, this was something else, something wrong, terribly wrong. And the silence was back, that oppressive, empty silence, thicker than before, like everything was holding its breath, waiting. Then it clicked, the grizzly running away, the headless deer, those roars, the screams. This wasn't a hunting ground, this was a pantry, a larder, this pile of headless deer. This was food, and whatever had done this, whatever had killed and decapitated these deer and scared off that grizzly, it was still out there, somewhere close, watching. Panic, pure, ice-cold panic. It surged through me, drowning out everything else. I had stumbled onto something ancient, something powerful, something that should not be here, something that considered grizzly bears prey and deer, well, deer were just snacks, and I was standing in its kitchen. I didn't think, I didn't plan, I just ran. I turned and ran back the way I came, scrambling back up the ridge, my rifle forgotten in my hands. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent shivers down my spine. I felt eyes on me. I felt something heavy, unseen, moving through the trees behind me, matching my pace. Imagination? Maybe. But the fear was real. So real I could taste it, bitter and metallic in my mouth. I didn't stop running until I burst back onto the logging road, lungs burning, legs screaming, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I ran blindly, not even knowing where I was going, just running away from that place, from that smell, from those headless deer, from the silence. Finally, I stumbled back to the truck where we'd parked that morning. Gustavo's truck was still there. Thank God, he wasn't there. I ripped open the truck door, threw myself inside, fumbled for the keys, jammed them in the ignition and twisted. Engine roared to life. I slammed the truck into reverse, backed up, spun the wheels in the gravel, and then gunned it down the logging road, bouncing and swerving, desperate to get out of there, to get away from Emerald Peaks, to get back to anywhere. I drove like a maniac, not slowing down until I was back on the main road, miles away from that canyon, miles away from that horror. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel. Sweat poured down my face, even though the air was cold. I pulled over to the side of the road, put the truck in park, and just sat there, panting, trying to catch my breath, trying to calm down. And then I saw him, walking up the road towards me, Gustavo. He looked confused, tired, like he'd been walking for a long time. He saw my truck, saw me, and his face lit up with relief. He ran the rest of the way, yanked open the passenger door, and climbed in. "Ricardo! Man, what happened to you? I heard gunshots and then nothing. I've been trying to find you all morning. What's going on?" Gunshots. I hadn't fired a shot. My rifle was still in my hands, safety on. But gunshots. Maybe it was the roars he heard, echoing through the canyon, sounding like gunshots from a distance. I don't know. I don't care. I just looked at him, my eyes wide, my chest still heaving. "Gustavo, we gotta go now, just go. Don't ask questions. Just trust me. We have to leave. Right now." He looked at me, really looked at me, saw the terror in my eyes, the sweat on my face, the way my hands were still shaking. He didn't say anything. He just nodded. "Okay," he said softly. "Okay, man, let's go." And I drove. I drove and drove and drove, miles and miles, never looked back, never slowed down until we were hours away from Emerald Peaks, back in civilization, back in the world of normal sounds and normal smells. We never went back to get our gear, rifles, backpacks, camping stuff. Everything was still up there, somewhere near that logging road, near that canyon, near that butcher's yard. We left it all. Didn't even talk about going back for it. Gustavo never pressed me for details, not really. He saw the state I was in. He knew something bad had happened. I told him some of it later, mumbled something about a bear attack, something about getting lost. He didn't push. He just knew I was scared, and that was enough for him. To this day, I don't know what it was. I've tried to make sense of it, tried to rationalize it, tried to tell myself it was just a grizzly, a really big grizzly that had somehow killed all those deer and got spooked. But it doesn't fit. Nothing fits. The roars, the screams, the headless deer, the sheer terror of that grizzly. It all points to something else. Something bigger, something worse. And the silence. That's what gets me the most still after all these years, that absolute suffocating silence, like the world was holding its breath. Sometimes when it gets really quiet at night, I can still hear it. That empty, waiting silence. And I remember those headless deer piled up in the clearing, and I know, deep down, that we weren't alone out there in Emerald Peaks that day, not alone at all. And whatever we weren't alone with, it was watching and waiting. And it was something that even a grizzly bear ran screaming from in terror. I can't explain it. I don't want to explain it. Some things are better left unexplained, I guess. Some doors are better left unopened, and some silences are just too loud to ever forget. Story 14. It was late summer, that kind of late summer where the air still hangs heavy and warm during the day, but you get a real crispness in the evenings that hints fall's coming. I needed to get away, properly away. City was grinding me down, work was relentless, just everything was too much. So I did something impulsive, something I hadn't done in years. I packed up my camping gear, pointed my car north, and just drove. I ended up at Serras Agrestes Provincial Park. Never been before. Saw it on a map. Looked massive, looked wild. That was the point, right? Wild. I drove in as far as I could on the gravel roads, then started looking at the trails. Wanted something remote, really deep in, where there wouldn't be anyone. Found a trail that looked promising. The map showed a lake, a good hike in, Calma Lake. Seemed perfect. Stuffed my pack, told myself I'd just hike in and find a spot by the lake, spend a night or two, just breathe. The hike in wasn't easy. It was hot, even under the trees, and the trail was steep in parts, rocky. But it was beautiful, truly beautiful. Giant cedars and pines, sunlight filtering through the canopy in these thick beams, smelled like pine needles and damp earth. It was exactly what I needed, that smell, that silence, just the sound of birds and the rustle of leaves. It started to feel like I was shedding the city with every step. Took me hours to reach the lake, felt longer because of the pack weight. But when I finally got there, wow. Calma Lake. It lived up to its name. Glassy smooth, reflecting the trees all around it like a perfect mirror. The shoreline was all rocky and rooty, perfect spots to set up a tent tucked back in the trees. I found a little clearing just back from the water's edge, under a huge pine, flat enough for my tent, and with a fire pit already kind of there from someone before. No sign of anyone else, not even a trace. Bliss. Setting up camp was almost therapeutic. Unpacking everything, getting the tent up, organizing my gear. It was slow, deliberate, calming. Once the tent was up, I just sat on a log and looked at the lake for a while. The sun was starting to dip behind the mountains, throwing long shadows across the water. The air was cooling down. That evening crispness I'd felt driving in was really setting in. I felt peaceful, actually peaceful, for the first time in ages. I made a small fire, just enough to cook dinner and have some light. Simple dehydrated meal, but it tasted amazing. Everything tastes amazing when you're camping, right? Especially after a long hike. As I ate, the sun went down completely, and the forest started to shift. The colors deepened, shadows got darker, and the sounds changed. The daytime birdsong faded, and the night sounds started. Crickets chirping, rustling in the undergrowth. Normal forest night sounds. But then, something else started. It was subtle at first. A feeling, more than a sound. A shift in the atmosphere. The normal forest sounds seemed to quieten down, like they were holding their breath. The crickets didn't stop exactly, but they seemed less loud, less constant. And the wind in the trees, which had been a gentle whisper, died down completely. Total silence, except for the crackling of my small fire. And then I heard it. The first thump. It wasn't loud, not at first, just a heavy, dull thud, like something big hitting the ground. But it wasn't a falling tree, it wasn't that kind of sound. It was rhythmic almost. Thump, pause, thump, pause. It was coming from deeper in the woods, away from the lake, behind my campsite. I told myself it was an animal, probably a deer, maybe a bear, rooting around for something. Parks are full of animals, right? But the thump wasn't right for an animal. It was too heavy, too regular. Deer don't thump like that. Bears don't really thump. And the pauses were too deliberate. Thump, pause, thump, pause. Closer now. I could feel my heart starting to speed up. Not full-on panic yet, but that little niggle of unease, that prickle on the back of your neck when you know something isn't right. I poked the fire just to get it going a bit brighter. The flames flared up, throwing light further out into the trees around my camp, but it didn't reach far. The forest just swallowed the light. Thump, thump, thump. Faster now, and definitely louder and heavier. Each thump seemed to vibrate through the ground. It wasn't like footsteps. Footsteps are lighter, quicker. This was weightier, more solid. Terror started to creep in properly then. Rational explanations were starting to evaporate. Deer, bear. What animal makes a sound like that, moving like that, with that kind of deliberate weight? And why were all the normal forest sounds completely gone? It was like everything else in the woods was holding its breath, waiting, listening to the thumping too. Thump, thump, thump. So close now, just beyond the edge of my firelight. I was frozen, sitting on that log, staring into the darkness, listening to each thump getting closer, closer. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe properly, and then I saw it, a shadow, moving between the trees at the edge of the firelight, tall, unbelievably tall, taller than any tree trunk, thicker too, just a dark shape against the deeper darkness of the forest. But the way it moved, it wasn't like a tree swaying in the wind. It was deliberate, controlled, and it was definitely moving closer to my camp. The thumping stopped. Silence. Complete, utter silence, except for the crackling of the fire, which suddenly seemed deafeningly loud in the stillness, and my heart hammering in my chest. I held my breath, straining to see, to hear anything, just the fire and the oppressive silence of the woods. Then the shadow moved again, slower this time. It stepped out from behind the trees into the very edge of the firelight, and it took shape. It wasn't a bear, not even close. It was humanoid, but monstrously tall and thick. Everything about it was wrong. The shape was roughly human, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head, torso, but distorted, exaggerated, like something had taken a human template and stretched it, twisted it, made it grotesque. It was covered in hair, thick, matted, dark hair, all over its body, everywhere, like a carpet of coarse fur. And the sheer size of it, it must have been 10, 12 feet tall, maybe taller. It dwarfed the trees around it, made everything else seem small and insignificant. Then it moved its head, slowly, deliberately, turned towards me, and I saw its eyes, yellow, bright, glowing yellow eyes, burning in the darkness. They weren't reflecting the firelight. They were glowing from within, with their own light, and they were fixed on me, staring straight at me. Those eyes, I will never forget those eyes. They weren't animal eyes. There was intelligence there, cold, calculating, predatory intelligence, and something else too, something ancient, something wrong, deeply, fundamentally wrong. I was paralyzed, completely, utterly paralyzed with fear. My mind was screaming at me to run, to scream, to do something. But my body wouldn't move. It was like my muscles had turned to stone. I was just sitting there, frozen, staring back at this thing. It just stood there. At the edge of the firelight, this colossal, hairy, humanoid creature with those glowing yellow eyes, staring at me, evaluating me, assessing me. I could feel its gaze. It felt physical, like a weight pressing down on me. It didn't make a sound, didn't growl, didn't snarl, didn't breathe heavily, just silence. Oppressive, terrifying silence, except for the crackling fire and my own ragged breaths, which I was barely even aware of. Time seemed to stop. I don't know how long it stood there, just staring at me. Could have been seconds, could have been minutes, felt like hours, an eternity of pure, unadulterated terror. And then just as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. It turned, slowly, deliberately, and stepped back into the shadows, melted back into the darkness between the trees, and vanished. Just gone. 1 second it was there, a monstrous silhouette at the edge of my firelight. The next second, nothing. Only darkness, only silence, only the fire burning down now, casting flickering shadows that danced and played tricks on my eyes. But even though it was gone, I didn't feel safe, not even for a second. The feeling of being watched was still there, stronger than ever, like those yellow eyes were still burning into me, even from the darkness. I knew it was still out there, watching, waiting. I didn't move. I couldn't move. I just sat there on that log, huddled close to the dying fire, staring into the darkness. Every shadow seemed to writhe, every rustle of leaves sounded like footsteps, every snap of a twig made me jump. I was convinced it was going to come back, that it was just playing with me, that it was going to reappear at any moment, and I didn't know what. But whatever it was going to be worse. The fire burned down to embers. The night grew colder. I didn't dare get up to put more wood on. I just sat there shivering, wrapped in my fear, unable to think, unable to move, just waiting. I don't know how I got through the rest of the night. It was a blur of terror and exhaustion. I didn't sleep. Couldn't even close my eyes for more than a second. Every creak of the trees, every whisper of wind made me jump, made me expect it to reappear. The feeling of being watched never went away. It was constant, heavy, suffocating. Then finally, after what felt like forever, the first hint of dawn. A faint grey light started to bleed into the darkness at the edges of the trees. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the darkness began to recede. The shadows started to lose their sharp edges. The forest started to regain its shape. As the light grew stronger, something shifted in the atmosphere. The oppressive weight lifted, just a tiny bit at first, then more and more. The feeling of being watched started to fade. Not completely, not ever completely, I don't think. But it lessened. When the sun finally broke through the trees, painting the lake with streaks of gold and pink, it was like a physical release. I could breathe again, my muscles unclenched. The paralysis finally broke. I didn't waste any time, didn't even think about breakfast or coffee or anything normal. I just scrambled to pack up my camp. Everything went into my pack haphazardly, thrown in any which way. Tent, sleeping bag, everything just shoved in, not even rolled properly. I just wanted to get out of there. To get away from that lake, from those woods, from that thing. I practically ran back down the trail, didn't stop, didn't look back, just put one foot in front of the other and ran, hiked, stumbled my way back to the car. The beauty of the forest, which had been so welcoming the day before, now felt menacing, hostile. Every tree seemed to watch me, every shadow seemed to hide something lurking. When I finally reached my car, I didn't even bother changing out of my hiking boots. I just jumped in, slammed the door, started the engine and drove. Drove as fast as I could, as far as I could, away from Serras Agrestes Provincial Park, away from Calma Lake. I haven't been back to the woods since, haven't been camping, haven't hiked in the wilderness. I can't. The memory of those glowing yellow eyes, the sheer size and wrongness of that creature, it's still too vivid. It's still there, lurking in the back of my mind. People ask me what I think it was. They ask if it was a bear or a moose or some kind of hallucination. They want a rational explanation, but I don't have one. And I know what I saw. I know it wasn't an animal, and I know it wasn't in my head. It was real, something real and terrifying, out there in the wilderness. Sometimes late at night when everything is quiet, I still hear it, that heavy, deliberate thumping. Thump, pause, thump, pause. And I see those yellow eyes burning in the darkness, and I know deep down that whatever it was, it's still out there. Somewhere, waiting, and I will never ever go back to find out what it is. Never again to Calma Lake. Story 15. It was August of 2018. Beautiful day, you know, Colorado in August is usually perfect for hiking. My mom, Helena, she just had knee surgery a few months before, nothing major, but she was still getting back into things. We're both really into hiking, it's kind of our thing, so we were both itching to get back on the trails. We live pretty close to Kenosha Pass, and there are tons of trails around there, some easy, some harder. We decided to take it easy, especially for Mom's knee. Picked a trail we'd done 1,000,000 times, near Kenosha Pass, pretty gentle incline, nothing too strenuous. Figured it'd be a nice, relaxing day out in nature. We parked the car, packed our usual stuff, water, snacks, sunscreen, you know the drill, and started off. The trail was mostly shaded, sun dappling through the trees, which was nice. Smelled like pine and dry earth, that familiar mountain smell I love. We were just chatting about whatever, catching up. It was peaceful. We'd probably been walking for maybe an hour, hour and a half, just taking our time. The trail was pretty quiet, didn't see too many other people that day, which was fine with us. We were kind of enjoying the solitude. Then, the first weird thing happened. We were just walking along, and suddenly I saw something move near my foot. A snake. But it was weird. This wasn't a snake I recognized. I've seen garter snakes and the occasional rattlesnake around there, but this was different. It was darker, almost black, and thicker than any garter snake I'd ever seen. And it didn't just slither away, it actually went over my hiking boot, crawled right over the top of my boot, and disappeared into the undergrowth on the side of the trail. It was so strange. Snakes usually don't act like that, especially not at that altitude and in the middle of the day when it's warm. They usually want to be left alone. I even mentioned it to Mom, saying something like, "That was a weirdly bold snake." She just shrugged. Maybe it's just used to people. But it felt off, like a little tiny prickle of unease. But we kept walking, tried to shake it off. We got to a kind of clearing, almost at the edge of the tree line. It wasn't a designated viewpoint or anything, just where the trees thinned out a bit, and you could see further out across the valley. We decided to take a break there, catch our breath, have a snack. Mom sat down on a fallen log, and I leaned against a big boulder. We were just munching on some granola bars and enjoying the view when we heard it. A thump. Just a single, deep thump. Sounded like it came from further back in the trees, maybe deeper into the woods on our right. It wasn't like thunder or an animal crashing through the brush. It was duller, heavier, more like something really big and kind of solid, hitting the ground. We both stopped chewing and looked at each other. "What was that?" Mom asked, her eyebrows furrowed. I shook my head. "I don't know." We stayed quiet for a minute, listening. Nothing. Just the usual sounds of the forest, birds chirping, leaves rustling in the breeze. Then, just out of stupid curiosity, I guess, I picked up a couple of small stones that were lying around. Just little pebbles, really. And I threw them towards the direction where we heard the thump, towards the deeper woods. Like a kid throwing stones into a pond, you know? Just tossed them a few feet into the trees. Nothing aggressive, just kind of checking. Dumb, I know, looking back. Mom gave me a look like, "What are you doing?" I just shrugged again, feeling a little silly myself. "Just seeing if anything's there," I mumbled. We finished our snack and started heading back down the trail. The walk back should have been easy, downhill, but the feeling of unease from earlier, the snake, the thump, it started to creep back in. And then we smelled it. Oh God, the smell. It hit us suddenly, like walking into a wall of stink. It was disgusting, like rotting garbage, but mixed with something else, something sharp and animalistic, like a skunk, but way, way worse. It made my stomach churn. Mom wrinkled her nose and coughed, waving a hand in front of her face. "What is that? Dead animal?" she said, her voice strained. I just gagged and pulled my shirt up over my nose. The smell was so thick, so heavy, it felt like you could taste it. And then we saw them, scattered on the trail, just a few feet ahead of us, shotgun shells, bright red plastic shotgun shells, just lying there on the dirt path, like someone had just dropped them. But who would be shooting a shotgun out here? This wasn't hunting season, and it was so close to the trail. It didn't make any sense. We stopped dead, staring at the shells. There were maybe 5 or 6 of them, spread out over a few feet, and they looked new, not weathered or faded like they'd been there for a while. "This is really weird," Mom said, her voice quiet. She was looking around, her eyes wide, scanning the trees. I was feeling it too now, a real sense of wrongness, like something was seriously off. The smell, the shells, it felt like we'd stumbled into something we shouldn't have. We started walking again, but much faster now, almost hurrying. We wanted to get out of there. And then it happened. The rock. We were walking past a particularly dense patch of trees, on our left this time. Dark, thick woods. You couldn't see more than a few feet in. And suddenly, There was this crashing, ripping sound of branches breaking, leaves rustling violently, and then a whoosh, like something massive moving through the air. And then a deafening thwack. A huge rock, slammed into a tree just a few feet in front of us, right on the edge of the trail. It hit the tree trunk with an explosion of splinters and bark, making the whole tree shudder. Dirt and bits of wood sprayed out. We both screamed, jumped back, stumbling backwards on the trail. My heart went absolutely insane, hammering in my chest. I could barely breathe. We stared at the tree, then at the rock lying on the ground beside it. It was huge, bigger than my head, jagged grey stone. Where did that come from? How could a rock that big just appear and hit that tree like that? And then we saw it. Through the trees, a movement, something tall, dark. At first, it was just a glimpse, a shadow shifting in the dim light of the woods. But then it moved again, stepped forward slightly, just to the edge of the trees, and we saw it clearly. It was... I don't even know how to describe it without sounding completely insane. It was tall, massive, taller than any man, taller than any bear. At least 7, maybe 8 feet tall. It was dark red, a deep, dull, brick red color, but somehow alive, like its skin or fur or whatever it was made of was moving slightly, like muscles twitching under skin. It was covered in something. I couldn't tell if it was fur or hair or scales or what, but it looked coarse, matted, disgusting, and the face, oh God, the face. It was almost human, but twisted, grotesque. The eyes, they were the worst. They were dark, black, and they gleamed, even in the shadows of the trees. They were fixed on us, staring, and there was something in those eyes, something cold, predatory, and intelligent. It wasn't an animal's gaze, it was calculating, menacing. It stood there, just at the edge of the woods, watching us, just staring. It didn't move, didn't make a sound, just stood there, this thing, this creature, and it was red, dark red. Against the green of the forest, it was unnatural, wrong, so wrong. We just froze, staring back at it, paralyzed with fear. Time seemed to stop. My breath hitched in my throat. I couldn't even scream. My legs felt like lead. I just stood there, locked in its gaze, my mind blank with pure terror. Then Mom finally reacted. She grabbed my arm hard. "Sophia, run!" she hissed, her voice shaking. And we ran. We turned and ran, back down the trail the way we came, ran as fast as we could, adrenaline flooding my system. I could hear Mom gasping for breath behind me, her knee probably killing her, but she was running, pushing herself. We didn't look back. We just ran. And then the rocks started flying. Not just pebbles this time, big rocks, heavy rocks. They started whistling past us, crashing through the trees around us. They were coming from the woods where we saw it. They were being thrown at us, deliberately, aimed. Rocks slammed into the trees beside the trail, showering us with bark and leaves. One hit the ground right behind Mom, spraying dirt up onto her legs. Another whizzed past my head, so close I felt the rush of air, heard the whoosh as it went by. I could hear them crashing behind us, getting closer. This wasn't random. This was an attack. We kept running. Downhill now, thank God, but the trail was uneven, rocky. Mum stumbled, almost fell. I grabbed her arm, pulled her upright. "Come on, Mom! Faster!" I yelled, even though my voice was just a choked whisper. The rocks kept coming. Faster now, more of them. It was like someone was unloading a barrage of stones at us. They were everywhere, whistling past, hitting trees, smashing into the ground. The sound was deafening, terrifying. We were running through a storm of rocks. I was expecting to get hit any second, expecting to feel a rock slam into my back, my head, to be knocked down, injured, helpless. I remembered something in my backpack, the air horn. I always carried a small air horn for hiking, for emergencies, for scaring off animals, though I'd never actually used it before. I fumbled with my backpack strap as I ran, trying to unclip it with shaking hands. Finally, I got it open, reached inside, felt for the cold metal of the air horn canister, grabbed it, pulled it out. I stopped running for a split second, turned back towards the trees, aimed the air horn in the direction of the woods, where the rocks were coming from, and I pressed the button. The blast of sound was deafening, ear-splitting. It echoed through the trees, a harsh, jarring, incredibly loud shriek. It hurt my own ears, even in that quick burst. And the rocks stopped, just like that. Silence, except for our ragged breathing and the pounding of our hearts. The rock throwing stopped. We stood there, panting, listening. Just silence. The horrible smell was still there faintly, but the rocks, the crashing, the fear. It stopped. We didn't wait to see if it would start again. We turned and ran harder than ever, using that brief pause, that moment of silence, to put as much distance as possible between us and whatever was back there in the woods. Mom was limping now, but she kept going, adrenaline pushing her forward.